23-year-old firefighter standing at 5 foot 10 inches tall. I don't think of myself as handsome, but I wasn't on a either. I was single and enjoying life as any young person should. I loved my job, enjoyed going out, and being a firefighter gave me some advantages with women. It allowed me to use cheesy pickup lines, and I had my share of casual relationships that suited my lifestyle. A downside to working in emergency services is the odd hours and shift work. Unlike regular jobs where weekends off are the norm, I might have my days off during the week. Local bars and clubs saw this as a chance to attract customers and held special blues and twos nights, specifically for emergency service workers. You could only enter if you showed ID proving you worked for the National Health Service, police, or fire service. If you fit the criteria and wanted a fun night out, it was the place to be. Having met a few policewomen and nurses over the years, I thought I was pretty experienced in relationships. I believed there was nothing I couldn't handle, but that night, I realized I had a lot to learn. At a blues and twos night, I noticed a stunning brunette nurse named Anne. We spent most of the night dancing closely to the music. She wore a classic black dress that highlighted her figure, and we shared a lot of flirty energy. As the night went on, she looked into my eyes and leaned in for a kiss. We kissed passionately, our arms wrapped around each other. "Come home with me," she whispered playfully in my ear. I smiled and replied, "I'd love to see more of you." We headed toward the cloakroom, and while we waited for her jacket, she asked me a question in a light-hearted way, but I could tell she was serious. "I need to ask you something important. I want to take a photo of your ID to send to a friend. It's just a safety measure, so they know where to look if anything goes wrong. Once you're gone tomorrow and they know I'm okay, I'll delete it." I handed her my firefighter ID, and a few minutes later, we were in a taxi on our way to her place. The taxi stopped at a nice home, and we went inside. After she took off her jacket, she invited me into the living room while she went to make us some drinks. As soon as she came in, I took off my shirt, tossing it aside with my socks, which I'd already removed. "Hold on a second. What are you doing?" she asked, standing in the doorway, looking a bit confused. I raised an eyebrow, puzzled. "You invited me here for this, right?" She walked over, leaned in close, and whispered in my ear, "I invited you for something special, not just that." I blinked, a bit uncertain. She rolled her eyes, amused, and explained, "Think of this like a meal. I'm not looking for fast food. I want to share something finer with you." She smiled, her lips curving slightly. "So, are you in?" I nodded, and she told me to wait in the living room as she moved past me, giving me a playful look before heading upstairs. Halfway up, she called back, telling me to wait until she called for me. I stood there, glancing around the room. My eyes landed on a photograph of Anne and a man. I'd noticed her wedding ring earlier, but we hadn't talked about it. I didn't want to ask, not wanting to ruin the moment. The man in the picture looked rugged, like someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. After a brief look, I sat down on the sofa. For the next few minutes, I heard her moving around upstairs, and then there was silence. Her voice, soft but filled with a certain energy, called me to come up. I took a deep breath and walked upstairs confidently. At the top, all the doors were shut except one, which was slightly open with a warm, soft glow of candlelight spilling out. I stepped inside. The room was dim, the candles flickering gently. Anne stood there, dressed in a sleek black outfit that hugged her body. She looked at me with a playful smile, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. I could feel the tension in the room, the atmosphere charged, but I kept my cool. She stepped closer, now standing a bit taller than me in her shoes, leaning in as if to kiss me. I closed my eyes, ready, but at the last moment she turned her head and I ended up kissing her cheek. She laughed softly, her hands resting on either side of my face. "I just fixed my makeup," she said with a smile, her voice light. "Let's not mess it up right away, okay?" She stepped back slightly, still smiling, the playful glint in her eyes impossible to miss. She brought out a black scarf and told me that dinner was about to be served. Wrapping it around my head, she covered my eyes, but I could still see a little through the fabric. She placed her hands on my shoulders and gently guided me down until I was level with the bottom of her dress. She softly asked me to lower her briefs, but as I reached up, she stopped me. Leaning down slightly, she tilted my head up with her hand and, with a playful tone, said, "No hands allowed. You need to earn this meal." I lowered my hands and leaned in, gently tugging the zipper of her dress with my lips. She let out a soft sound, drawing me closer. I could feel her warmth and the faint scent of soap mixed with something uniquely her. Slowly, I moved down and caught the edge of her briefs with my teeth, trying to pull them lower. The fabric only moved a little before stopping. She giggled and said, "Looks like there's something in the way," turning around and presenting her back to me. I tried again, this time pulling the briefs down over her hips. As they slid a bit lower, she teased me again, saying, "You're not quite done yet." Then she turned back around. I focused on carefully lowering her briefs further, down past her legs. As they dropped to her ankles, I instinctively leaned in closer, but she stepped back, laughing, keeping just out of reach. I could sense the closeness between us, the atmosphere charged. Still feeling the scarf lightly covering my eyes, I worked to pull the last of her briefs down, but I realized I couldn't finish without her help. She giggled before responding, let me think about that." After a brief pause, she lifted her leg just a bit and stood still. "Can't you lift it any higher?" I asked. "No, silly, it's stuck around my other ankle," she said with another giggle. "Here's a hint. Lie on your back and turn your head slightly." Following her instructions, I carefully removed her briefs from the first leg, then repeated the process with the other foot until they were finally off. As I started to sit up, she placed one foot firmly on my chest, pressing slightly with the heel, though not hard enough to hurt. I gasped, surprised by the gesture. I could see her legs towering over me, the height of her shoes giving her an added air of confidence. Her stance made me feel the tension in the air. She pressed her foot down lightly and, in a teasing voice, asked if she was the cause of my current state. I responded with a strained, "Yes." Lifting her foot again, she lightly tapped the heel against my lips, telling me to kiss it and follow the line of her leg with kisses. My heart raced as I did what she asked, kissing up her leg slowly, my thoughts completely consumed by her. As I reached her thigh, I managed one more kiss before she pulled away, laughing softly. "Don't forget the other leg," she teased. "We wouldn't want it to feel left out." I repeated the process, kissing up her other leg, moving higher, but before I could get too close, she stepped back with another playful laugh. "You're moving a little too fast," she said with a smirk. "This isn't a quick snack, you know." I groaned, frustrated, telling her that I couldn't take much more, but she just giggled and, with a playful tone, responded, "Oh, does it really hurt?" "Let's see if a little care can help ease the tension," she said with a smile. "Stand up, and let's get the blindfold off." I stood, and she twirled a proper blackout blindfold around her finger before handing it to me, signaling for me to cover her eyes. She leaned in close, whispering softly, "Now it's my turn," before placing a light kiss on my neck, trailing down towards my chest. I breathed in her familiar scent as she continued, her lips brushing against my skin. The sensation overwhelmed me, sending shivers through my body. My nerves tingled, each kiss adding to the intensity, and I found myself shuddering at the sensation. Without warning, she playfully nipped at my chest, and I jumped, letting out a surprised sound. She chuckled, enjoying my reaction, and continued with a mix of gentleness and teasing. As she moved lower, her dress shifted with her movements, showing off her graceful form. It clung to her figure in all the right ways, emphasizing her natural curves. When she reached the waistband of my trousers, she knelt down and used her teeth to unfasten the button, then lowered the zipper. I couldn't help but laugh a little as she quickly pulled my trousers down to my knees. I jokingly told her she was cheating, but she just laughed along, helping me step out of them. She leaned in again, brushing her nose lightly against me, then exhaled softly with a quiet hum of approval. Continuing her playful approach, she kissed around, teasing and exploring. The mix of sensations made me react with surprise and excitement. She kept things light and fun, her laughter echoing in the air as I stood there, both amused and captivated by her teasing manner. She released her grip and pulled back, then quickly used both hands to slide my boxers down. I let out a teasing complaint, calling her a cheater, and she laughed, removing the blindfold from her eyes. Looking down at her, I was struck by her confidence. She smiled, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Lesson 1, she said. Women don't always play by the rules, they bend them to their advantage." She tossed the blindfold aside, locking her eyes on mine. She stood up and gently guided my head down towards the zipper of her dress. This time I didn't need instructions. I carefully pulled the zipper down, parting the fabric as I did. Our lips met in a deep kiss, and we moved in sync, her arms wrapping around my neck. My hand reached up, resting softly on her shoulder as we shared the moment. I paused for a second to take in the sight of her, slightly unsure of how to react. "What's wrong?" she asked, with a curious smile. With a shy laugh, I told her I'd never been with someone who had piercings like hers. She gave me a playful look. "Do you like them?" she asked, her tone light and teasing. I nodded, my voice full of energy. "Absolutely." She stepped forward, guiding my hand lower as she whispered in my ear. "And what about this?" She placed my hand over her hip, letting me feel the soft warmth of her skin. We stood there, close, connected by the moment. Then she pulled away, stepping back until she reached the bed and lay down, positioning herself comfortably in the middle. She motioned for me to stay where I was, smiling with a playful glint in her eye. "Just watch," she said softly. I stood, watching her as she traced her hand lightly over her stomach. The moment was filled with tension and anticipation, yet everything felt light, with her laughter and playful gestures keeping it all in balance. We exchanged glances, her smile teasing, and I could sense the fun and connection between us. Each time I asked her what she wanted, she kept pushing me to say the right thing, but I couldn't figure it out. We went in circles trying different words like make love or be close, but it was never enough. Her breathing grew more intense, and I could see her body reacting, tension building up until she tensed and shuddered, clearly lost in her own moment. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt completely overwhelmed, desperate to understand what she wanted me to say. Finally, in a moment of frustration, I shouted, "What do you want me to say?" Her eyes opened, filled with determination. "Ask me to take you to heaven," she whispered. "Take me to heaven," I finally pleaded. She smiled, reaching her arms out for me. I joined her on the bed, and as our lips met, everything around us blurred. The connection between us was powerful, both of us completely lost in the moment. Time seemed to stand still, and as we held each other close, the intensity of everything around us became too much to handle. Eventually, we both lay there, trying to catch our breath, feeling the quiet after the storm. "You're really trying to take me to heaven, aren't you?" I said between breaths, and she simply nodded, smiling softly. After a few minutes, the room calmed, and we shared a quiet moment, reflecting on the intensity of everything that had just happened. It felt like nothing I had experienced before. She slowed down and gently pulled away, letting go with a soft pop as she moved back. "See?" she breathed with a playful smile. "I told you I'd mess up my makeup." She shifted and sat astride me, her skin glowing in the soft candlelight. She locked eyes with me, holding my gaze as she teasingly moved, brushing against me, but always pulling back just when I thought we'd connect. The tension built between us, her laughter light and teasing. Then, without warning, she lowered herself, bringing us together in a way that felt powerful and overwhelming. I could feel every movement, every shift of her body as we moved in sync. Her focus stayed on me, intense and unwavering. I placed my hands gently on her, and together we shared the moment. Her energy was captivating, and we both became lost in the experience, everything else fading away. As the moment built, I could feel her body tense, her breath becoming short as she leaned into me, drawing me closer. Afterward, we lay there, breathing heavily, feeling the warmth of our connection. I wrapped my arms around her as we both slowly came back from the intensity of what we had shared. After a while, she rolled over beside me, glancing at me with a soft, apologetic smile. "Sorry, I got a bit carried away," she said, brushing her fingers across my lip, showing me a small trace of blood. I smiled back, knowing that the moment had been powerful, yet somehow we both felt calm and at peace. I responded, "I think you might have scratched my back too," and rolled over to show her. She giggled. "Oh no, I'm really sorry, I got carried away." She then kissed my back gently in a few places before snuggling up beside me. She whispered in my ear, I'll go make us a drink and we can relax a bit." After a quick, playful tug on my hand, she slipped out of bed, kicked off her shoes, and headed downstairs to get the drinks. I lay there for a moment, noticing a small cut on my calf where her heel had pressed a bit too hard. I couldn't help but smile, feeling both amused and a bit out of my depth. A little while later, she came back into the room, balancing 2 drinks, and blowing a stray strand of hair out of her face. She set the glasses down and extended her hand to me with a grin. "Come on, let's freshen up with a shower before we continue," she said, her eyes sparkling as she walked toward the ensuite bathroom. I watched her with admiration, her every movement full of grace. As I followed her into the bathroom, she stepped into the shower, turning the water on. I joined her, and she squirted some gel into her hands, beginning to gently wash my back. Her touch was calm and soothing as she worked her way lower, helping me wash off. We stood under the warm water, and I returned the favor, carefully washing her shoulders and letting the soap run down her body. I took my time, making sure she felt cared for. We exchanged quiet smiles, letting the steam and warmth ease us both. After we finished, we stood for a moment under the water, letting the peacefulness of the moment settle over us. We then stepped out, grabbed towels, and dried off, ready to continue our evening, now feeling refreshed and relaxed. I was completely focused, driven by instinct, pushing forward with all my energy. My muscles were burning, and I could feel my heart racing as I gasped for air through the shower's mist. I knew I couldn't keep going for much longer. Just then, she tensed, holding on tightly, and I pushed myself beyond my limits. She trembled as the moment overwhelmed her, but I had reached my own limit, and my legs gave out. We slid down the wall, both exhausted, barely able to stand. She quickly turned off the shower, and we stood there, catching our breath, shaking from the intensity. We stumbled out, and I leaned on the bathroom counter, head down, trying to recover. Anne came up behind me, massaging my shoulders, and whispered softly, "I told you I'd take you to heaven." She handed me a towel, and we dried off in silence, both calming down after what had felt like a whirlwind. Anne went to the mirror, wiping away the remnants of her makeup, and she gently motioned for me to leave the bathroom. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, suddenly realizing we hadn't talked about what would happen next. Unsure of what she wanted, I assumed she might need some space. Thinking I should leave, I started getting dressed. As I pulled on my trousers, Anne stepped out of the bathroom, stopping in her tracks. "Oh, so it was that good, and now you're going to sneak off?" There was a slight edge to her voice. I looked at her, surprised. No, I thought. When you sent me out, I assumed you wanted me to go. We never talked about it." She walked up to me, gently placed a finger on my lips to stop me from speaking, and knelt down in front of me. "If I wanted you to go, why would I have gotten ready again?" she asked playfully. "Unless, of course, you do want to leave." Her smile was mischievous, and she already knew my answer. I watched as she leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine, making it clear she wanted me to stay. The moment was filled with warmth and connection, the earlier intensity replaced by something quieter, but just as meaningful. We continued at a steady pace, and I could feel the tension building between us. She maintained eye contact, focused and determined, not showing any sign of stopping. Just when she sensed I was getting close, she suddenly paused, keeping still. I instinctively tried to pull away, but she gently signaled that it wasn't time yet. She took my hands and placed them on either side of her head, guiding me. Slowly I understood what she wanted, and I began to move, carefully at first. Gradually, I picked up the pace, moving in rhythm. Her expression remained calm, urging me to continue. I did, and after some time she reached out, pulling me closer, encouraging me. Everything intensified as we moved in sync, the moment building until it reached its peak. Afterward, we both paused, taking a moment to catch our breath. She then moved up beside me, and we shared a quiet kiss, a peaceful connection after the intensity of the moment. Rolling onto my back, I felt her cuddle close, and soon my eyes began to feel heavy. I drifted off into sleep, completely relaxed. When I woke up, I felt a warm sensation and realized she was sitting beside me, gently stroking my arm. "You fell asleep on me last night," she teased with a smile. "Did I wear you out?" Before I could respond, she moved closer, and we shared another quiet moment together, much like the night before. Afterward, I lay there, exhausted, and finally had to admit that I was out of energy. She laughed, kissed me, and said, "I have a habit of wearing people out." She walked off toward the shower, still laughing. I took my time getting up, feeling refreshed but completely spent. After she finished her shower, she asked if I wanted tea or coffee. Once I was up and dressed, I joined her downstairs. She looked different, with her hair tied back and no makeup, but still radiated a calm beauty. We sat together, the morning quiet, and I couldn't help but appreciate the peacefulness of it all. She wore a red silk kimono that reached mid-thigh, revealing a bit of skin. I couldn't help but notice her style. We shared some toast and my coffee at her dining table. I looked at a photo hanging on the wall that I had seen the night before. Before you ask, yes, that's my husband. Yes, we're still married. Yes, he knows I'm having fun, and no, he isn't likely to come home unexpectedly. She told me about meeting him in her hometown, Hereford, while he was training in the army as a logistics specialist. They married young, but she didn't fit in well with the other wives. With her husband often away for long periods, she decided to take a job as a physiotherapy nurse at Bournemouth Royal Infirmary. They both agreed she would move, even though he still worked away a lot. After a moment, she took a sip of her tea and surprised me with something she revealed. She admitted it was hard for her to handle his absence. She needed closeness and was finding it tough to be faithful. They feared this could lead to serious problems. In the end, they made a mutual agreement. They could both explore their personal lives, but with some simple rules. There could be no signs of it happening or talk about it. It must not happen at home. If one of them saw someone else, it was just a one-time thing. I let out a long breath after hearing this and asked, "So there's no chance of doing this again?" "I'm sorry, no. As fun as it was, I don't want to hurt my husband's trust." She said this quietly, looking down at her cup instead of at me. Curious, I spoke again. "But you said it shouldn't happen at home. We're here now?" "That's true," she said. "I usually booked a room at the local hotel when I wanted to see someone. I would prepare in advance and bring someone back with me for a short visit. But once, the people next door complained about the noise, and the night manager caught me just as my guest was leaving. He misunderstood the situation. When I checked out in the morning, the manager told me that what I did wasn't allowed, and I was banned from that hotel. To make it worse, others in the lobby overheard, and I left feeling very upset. I never told my husband, but I bent that rule, though I used the spare room to make myself feel better. I looked at her and nodded. "That makes sense. I'm sorry about what happened with the hotel. I hate the idea of you being sad." I hesitated, then asked, "If you bent one rule, would you bend another and see me again?" She smiled softly, but shook her head, signaling her answer was no. We sat in an awkward silence for a few moments before Anne sighed, got up, and began gathering the dishes to wash them at the sink. I watched her, feeling a sense of longing. She looked stunning, even in her simple kimono, which cinched her waist and flowed over her figure. The sight stirred something inside me. I stood up and walked over to her. She must have sensed my approach because she stopped washing the dishes, resting her hands on the counter. As I got closer, she gently leaned back toward me, and I placed a soft kiss on her neck. She responded quietly, but before things went further, she turned around and kissed me deeply, her hands moving quickly to undo my trousers. The moment felt intense, and without speaking, we were drawn into each other. I helped her up onto the counter, and we shared another kiss. The connection between us was raw and electric, but it wasn't long before reality hit. As we both caught our breath, I carried her over to the dining table, setting her down carefully. We exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, but then a mug fell to the floor, shattering the moment with the sound of breaking glass. We paused, a bit startled, but still completely lost in the heat of the moment. Everything felt intense and overwhelming. Afterward, we both stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I gently helped her down from the table, and as she sat, tears welled up in her eyes. Seeing her cry made my heart sink. I realized the weight of everything that had just unfolded, and the guilt hit me hard. "I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I hope I haven't hurt or upset you." She started to cry more, and I looked around for tissues. After she wiped her eyes and took a few minutes, she seemed calmer. I didn't expect her response. I'm not upset with you at all. It's just that I felt so intense it made me emotional. She began to tear up again, but I comforted her, which seemed to help. Oh no, I must look terrible, she said. Let me freshen up before you leave. And she hurried upstairs. Holding the broken mug, I thought about how I could see her again. Then I noticed a flip calendar on a corkboard. Each day was marked like someone with a shift job would do. I scanned it quickly until I spotted what I needed an early shift that matched my days off. I grabbed a pen and wrote my phone number on that date with a note that said 8 p.m. A few minutes later, she came back down looking much better. She walked over to me and kissed me sweetly. When she pulled away, she said, "Thank you. I really enjoyed our time together, and I'm sorry for my earlier outburst. I need to get ready for my shift now, but I truly enjoyed last night. It was special." I kissed her back and told her that I would cherish that night in my heart. She blushed and gave me a quick kiss on the lips before heading to the back door. "I'm sorry, but could you please use the back entrance? I don't want the neighbors talking." I smiled and nodded, then stepped out and turned around. My heart raced, and I thought I saw tears in her eyes. "At least you'll remember me," she said with a smile, "a sore lip and some marks on your back." I laughed with her, turned, and walked away. As I made my way back toward town, I reflected on my experiences and realized I had a lot to learn about relationships. Once home, I slept for the rest of the day. When I checked my back in the mirror, I was surprised by the marks left there. I didn't mind, though. I saw them as a reminder of the time we spent together. When I woke up, I looked at my phone, hoping for a message, but there was nothing. I tried to convince myself that she might reach out, but deep down I knew it was unlikely. I returned to work, and life went on as usual. Well, not exactly normal. At the Blues and Twos event, I looked for Anne, but she wasn't there. I danced and enjoyed myself with some of the women and surprised a young nurse when I turned down her invitation to her place. The day arrived that I had circled on Anne's calendar, and I felt nervous, checking my phone repeatedly. My grandmother asked what was wrong. I shrugged and said I was waiting for a call about a date. She reassured me not to worry, saying there are many other opportunities out there. At 2:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I answered with a cautious hello. There was silence for a moment before a familiar voice spoke. "I see you made an appointment for 8 p.m. tonight, but I'm sorry I can't make it." My heart sank as I felt disappointment wash over me. I replied that I understood and thanked her for calling. "It's okay," she said. "I can't meet at 8, but would 6:30 work? Please bring a nice bottle of red wine for dinner. Be discreet. I'll leave the back gate unlocked." She hung up and I celebrated quietly. I could hardly believe my luck. I drove into town and found a wine shop, asking for their best red wine. I left with a bottle of Luminous Hills Pinot Noir, very special reserve. Next, I stopped at a florist to buy a lovely bouquet of flowers before heading home. After a quick shower and getting ready, I put on my best casual clothes. I drove over and parked a couple of streets away, arriving right at 6:30. I opened the gate and noticed it was dark inside, with no sounds indicating anyone was home. I gently knocked on the door, and a voice invited me in as the door was unlocked. I stepped inside and was almost speechless. The room was lit by candles, and a table was set for two. Standing there was a stunning woman. Her black hair was neatly pinned up, and her flawless makeup highlighted a beautiful face, accented by bright red lipstick. She wore a black top with red lace trim and black stockings, her feet in tall black heels. She smiled at me while I stood there in awe, then took the wine and flowers from my hands. Leaning closer, she gave me a soft kiss and whispered, "Looks like you were lost for words." I stammered and replied, "No, I just can't find the words right now." I don't think there are enough words to describe the stunning beauty standing in front of me. She wrapped her arms around my neck and pulled me in for a long, meaningful kiss before stepping back. She laughed. "I thought the lipstick would last at least until we went upstairs." We both chuckled, but then her expression turned serious. "Matt, I've thought about you every day since we were together. When I saw you wrote down your number, I thought that was quite bold. I've tried not to call you until today, but my willpower gave in this morning. I know I said I had rules to follow, and this is a big step away from them, but I couldn't help it. I needed to see you again, even just this once." I told her I felt the same way and hoped she would reach out to me again. If I could see her just this one more time, I would be content. We shared dinner and drank wine by candlelight. After we finished, we talked for a while before Anne went upstairs, calling for me much like she did during my first visit. When I entered the room, her lips were a bright red and she looked excited, holding an eye mask in one hand and something else in the other. I quietly closed the door behind me and we spent a passionate night together. This time, our time together went on until 4 a.m. when we were both exhausted and fell asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, we sat together in silence over coffee and toast, both unsure of what to say next. We both spoke at the same time, and I urged her to go first. "Matt, I'm confused. I can't get enough of you, but I'm married to my husband, whom I love deeply, and it's tearing me apart. I know we shouldn't be doing this, but the thought of you leaving soon is breaking my heart." With that, she started to cry, and I moved to comfort her. She stood up and pressed her head against my chest, sobbing. I took a deep breath and said, "This can be whatever you want. If I can see you once a year, I will be happy. If I remain in the background of your life, I'll still be okay with that. If you want me to disappear, I won't be happy, but I will respect your choice and step back. Even though we've only met a couple of times, I feel a strong connection to you. I don't know how or why, but it's there." She cried harder, resting her face against my chest for a few minutes before wiping her tears. She sat back down, thoughtfully tracing her finger around the rim of her coffee cup. I turned on the kettle to make another cup of coffee. As I set a fresh cup in front of her, she looked up and began to speak. "If we are going to continue, we need to set some rules. The first one is we won't go against the one rule left about my marriage. The second rule is that we must keep our relationship a secret. You should not talk about us to anyone else. Third, when my husband is home, you need to stay away from me. If we run into each other at work, just ignore me. Lastly, I know it's hard to stay faithful when we can't be together. If you decide to date someone else, please tell me, and we will be careful until you get tested for any health issues." I quickly agreed and said I would sign anything. She looked a bit annoyed, but I insisted I was serious about following these rules. We talked a bit longer and decided that Anne would get a prepaid phone to keep in her locker at work for us to use. We discussed how this could all work. Eventually, I had to leave, and we shared a warm embrace and a kiss by the back door. As I turned to say goodbye, I reminded her, "Matt, Lance must never find out about us. He would be very upset." I smiled, but she looked serious when she replied, "I'm not joking, Matt. Please stick to the plan." I nodded, feeling excited at the thought of seeing her again. And so our secret relationship began. We met at least once a week, sometimes during the day, as we tried to fit our time together around work. I felt on top of the world, and being with her opened my eyes to new experiences. However, one morning, just as I was leaving her place, she dropped unexpected news. "Matt, Lance is coming home at the end of the week, so we need to pause this for a while." "How long?" I asked. She hesitated and said, 3 weeks. "Can you find a way to see me during that time? I will really miss you." Tears filled her eyes, and she said, "You knew this could happen. I'm sorry, but it has to be this way." Frustrated, I left without another word, slamming the gate behind me. Her tears echoed in my mind as I walked away angrily. That night at work, I felt rejected and upset. My coworkers made jokes asking if I was okay, which only annoyed me more. I walked off to find some quiet time. The night was slow, and just as I was about to head home, I received a text. "Matt, please don't be mad at me. You knew this would happen. It's just as hard for me as it is for you. I'm going to miss you a lot for the next 3 weeks. I promise I'll make it up to you when things get back to normal." I was still upset from the day before and typed away angrily on my phone. "It's easy for you while I'm all alone. You'll be busy and won't even think about me." I pressed send, immediately regretting it. I called her, but it went to voicemail. "Anne, please, don't read my last message. I'm sorry. I sent it because I feel shut out. Please forgive me." I tried reaching her a few more times, but her phone was off. I realized I had really messed up and hoped she would understand that I couldn't stand the thought of not seeing her. I called her several times over the next few days, but her phone remained off and my messages went unread. I had lost her because of my childish actions. Weeks went by, and I felt miserable at work. We got a call about a fire caused by some kids who had set a couple of bins ablaze behind some shops. After we finished there, I noticed we were driving near Anne's house. It was late at night, and I saw no lights on downstairs while a flicker appeared in the bedroom. My hands tightened into fists as frustration grew within me. I anxiously checked my phone day and night. My coworkers started to feel sorry for me, thinking I had been dumped. They knew I was in a relationship, but had no idea how complicated it really was. I lived with my grandmother, who noticed my sadness but didn't pry, just assuring me she was there if I ever wanted to talk. I shut myself away and immersed myself in online games. It was June, with plenty of sunny weather. I found comfort in my longtime love, my Yamaha R1 motorcycle. Riding this powerful bike gave me an adrenaline boost that momentarily eased my feelings about missing Anne. Living on the south coast of England meant I had amazing roads in the New Forest to explore, both day and night. It helped relieve some of the pain of missing Anne. I knew the 3 weeks were almost over and prayed she would reach out to me again. 3 weeks turned into 5, and I fell deeper into a sad state, fully aware that it was my fault. I checked my phone constantly for messages from Anne, but they never came. I left one last message, apologizing again and wishing her happiness. During the following week, we had 5 days off work. On the last shift, my coworkers encouraged me to go out on the first night we were off. They were tired of my sadness and thought getting out would help me feel better. We met at a pub before starting a night out. Some of our friends who were married left when we got to the Blues and Twos night. We walked in and went straight to the bar to get drinks. After that, we turned to see who was dancing. I quickly spotted a pretty brunette, Anne, who was having fun with her friends. I watched her for a while until one of her friends saw me. She told Anne, and Anne turned to look at me. She stopped dancing and walked away into the crowd. I followed her and found her outside in a quiet area. She was alone, looking down and crying. I walked up to her and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. She turned around suddenly and, upset, told me I was being cruel. Then she leaned against me and cried very hard. I wrapped my arms around her, and my own tears fell as I held her close. After some time, she calmed down and pulled back. Her eyes were puffy and her makeup was smudged. "I need to clean up and tell my friends I don't feel well. I'll meet you at the pub around the corner on C Street," she said. Anne walked away, and I looked for my friends, but they were busy talking to some girls. So I left the club, walked to the pub, ordered a couple of drinks, and sat down at a small table for 2. Soon, Anne came in again, looking better, but it was clear she had been crying. She sat down and looked at me. Tentatively, she reached out her hand across the table. I reached for hers and lightly held them. "I thought I lost you. As soon as I sent those first messages, I realized I went too far. I felt rejected and my feelings took over. I'm really sorry, Anne, and I'll keep saying sorry if I need to," I said, while squeezing her hands gently. Her eyes filled with tears again. "You hurt me when you walked away that morning, leaving me upset. Your messages were like twisting the knife. I'm angry with you for breaking your promise when Lance came home. It wasn't a surprise. You knew it would happen. Just remember, it's me who made the mistake, not you." She spoke with quiet anger, but her face showed sadness. I let go of her hands and started to get up. Tears were starting to flow. Just then, she grabbed my arm, her fear replacing her anger. "Don't go. Please, I'm sorry. I don't want you to leave. Sit back down." I sat back down, feeling more confused about what she wanted. She reached her hands across the table again, and I gently squeezed them once more. "I really didn't like you, but I also missed you and was worried you'd find someone else. I thought you had moved on. For the first week, I didn't turn on my phone because I was upset with you. Eventually, that changed, but the thought that you might message me to say it was over was hard to handle." Anne let go of my hands and took a tissue from her bag to wipe her eyes. The pub was quiet, and the few people there looked at us with concern, thinking we were just having a disagreement. Anne went to the restroom, and a woman in her 50s came over and put her hand on my shoulder. I looked up, and she could see I was sad. "Listen, dear, I don't know what happened, but take a deep breath and let it go. If you can't see it, she really loves you. Whatever happened, she's hurting and needs to know you love her back." She patted my shoulder and went back to her husband. The truth was, I loved Anne. The big question was whether Anne loved me too. She came out of the restroom having fixed her makeup, but her eyes were still red from crying. She stood by me and asked if I was ready to go. "Is this what you want, Anne? Please don't do it just to make yourself feel better." "No, it's not about guilt. I want to try to start over. Are you okay with that?" "Yes, of course. I would love that. I've learned a lot, and as hard as it is, I'll accept whatever happens between us. Do you want to come back to my place?" She seemed a little nervous as she asked. "Of course I will." I finished my drink and stood up to leave. "Don't you need to go to the restroom?" I was confused by her question. "No, I'm fine," she replied, looking at me as if I had missed something important. "Do you remember the rule about going to the restroom to use the vending machine?" I smiled and raised my hand. "I'm sure my partner is safe." She smiled back, playfully. "Really? You mean you've only been with Palmela Henderson?" She laughed. "I'm not sure I can compete with her." We walked out to get a taxi, and the woman who had spoken to me earlier smiled at me and winked. Anne noticed and joked, "Looks like you have an admirer," and nudged me playfully as we left the pub. I didn't tell her about what the woman had said. We walked to the club and got into a taxi. As Anne got in, her red skirt rose a bit, showing off her legs. I got in next to her and the taxi started moving. Anne moved closer to me and we began to kiss, the intensity growing with each moment. Her hand found my leg, and I could feel her touch as she softly ran her hand over my thigh. I shifted slightly, placing my hand on her leg as well. As soon as I did, she parted her legs a bit, welcoming my touch. I gently stroked her leg, my hand moving upwards. Our connection deepened, but then she pulled back slightly, her breathing quickening. She looked at me, taking a deep breath, her eyes wide and searching. After a moment, she pushed me back into the seat, leaning forward to continue the kiss. My hand rested on her shoulder, and we were lost in the moment for a while. Suddenly, the sound of a car horn broke through the intensity. I glanced up and noticed the taxi driver quickly looking away, hurrying to pull the car forward as the traffic light had changed. When we arrived at Anne's, I paid the driver, who seemed more than ready to leave us to our own devices. Once inside, Anne took my hand and led me into the lounge. We stood by the sofa, our lips meeting in a passionate kiss. Her hands moved quickly, undoing my belt, but before I could respond, she gently pushed me down onto the sofa. She climbed on top of me, and for a brief moment the room felt charged with energy. As we were caught in the moment, a sudden thought flashed into my mind, an image of her with someone else, and it shook me. The connection broke as I gently pushed her back, stopping her. She looked at me, her expression shifting from excitement to confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice softening, concern replacing the earlier passion. "Nothing's wrong," I said gently. "I just want to hold you for a bit." Anne moved her arms from my shoulders, embracing me tightly. She leaned in, and I rested my head against her, feeling the warmth of the moment. We sat quietly for a few minutes as she whispered reassuringly, telling me not to worry and that everything would be okay. I could feel her moving slightly, but it was a soft, comforting motion. I looked up at her, and our lips met again in a passionate kiss, but this time, the intensity wasn't angry, it was full of emotion. After a few minutes, she pulled away, catching her breath. We stayed close, both of us quiet except for the sound of our breathing. Anne held on to me tightly, and I could feel the warmth of her body as she leaned against me, her heart pounding as it gradually slowed. She eventually relaxed, her breathing becoming steady and soft, and I realized she had fallen asleep in my arms. I shifted carefully, trying not to wake her as I stood up from the sofa. But she held on, wrapping her arms around my neck. I gently carried her to the bedroom and laid her down on the bed. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, and she reached out to touch my face. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, her voice soft, her eyes glistening with tears. I stroked her cheek gently and replied, "No, we almost lost each other, but it won't happen again." She smiled slightly, letting her hand fall as she drifted back to sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, thinking about what the future might hold. I hoped there was a way forward for us, some path that could keep us together. After a moment, I took off my clothes, covered her with the blanket, and got into bed beside her. She instinctively moved closer, cuddling into me, still half asleep. I lay there for a while, simply watching her breathe until sleep finally claimed me too. Hours later, I awoke with a start, feeling an unexpected sensation. My breathing was rapid, and my mind was still groggy with sleep. I looked down and realized that Anne had woken up and was close to me, her presence a gentle reminder of our connection. As she gently pulled away, she said, "I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself. I feel bad about last night, like I left things unfinished. I wanted to make it up to you." She moved closer, softly kissing me. It was calm, unhurried, and full of warmth. After a moment, she paused, looking into my eyes. "Matt, I don't want this to be just physical. I want us to make love. Please, make love to me." She lay back, and I positioned myself over her, holding myself up on my arms. Slowly, she guided me toward her, and rather than rushing, I moved gently, taking my time. Our kisses continued, soft and tender, and for the first time we connected in a way that felt deeper. It wasn't rushed, it was thoughtful, and we stayed like that until well after sunrise. Afterward, we drifted off to sleep in each other's arms. Later, we woke up, showered, and went downstairs for breakfast. We sat together, sipping our coffee in comfortable silence, but soon she broke it. "Matt, why did you stop me last night? Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly, her tone full of curiosity. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. She walked over, wrapping her arms around my neck from behind, placing a gentle kiss on my ear. "We need to be honest if this is going to work," she whispered. With another deep breath, I confessed, "When we were together last night, I suddenly had this image of you being with Lance, of you leading him to the same place, sitting where I sat. It made me feel sick. I couldn't shake it." Her arms fell from my shoulders, and for a moment I feared the worst. But then she gently turned my face toward hers, looking at me with understanding. "What if I told you there were times when I closed my eyes and I imagined it was you, not him? But you need to remember, Matt, he's still my husband. I do love him no matter where this takes us." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "So where does this take us, Anne?" I asked quietly. She sighed, clearly struggling with her own thoughts. "Truthfully, I don't know. After Lance left, I realized how much I needed you in my life. There's something about our connection that I don't want to lose. But I don't have all the answers. I'm asking a lot from you, and I understand if it's too much." I shook my head gently. "I don't want to walk away. I'll try to handle this, but remember, when Lance is back, I have no one." There was a quiet moment between us before Anne suddenly started to laugh, breaking the tension. The laughter felt like a much-needed release, a reminder that despite the uncertainty, we could still find lightness in the situation. "Liar, liar, pants on fire! You already said you've been seeing Palmela Henderson!" I laughed with her, and that eased the tension for now. She took my hand and looked at it closely. It doesn't look worn out. I thought you would have worn it out by now." I pulled my hand back playfully. "You say you never strayed, but you showed up at the club last night. Come on, are you seriously saying you didn't meet some other cute nurse? You know how adventurous they can be?" I met her gaze, and she saw the truth in my eyes. "That's the first time I've been out since I last saw you. My coworkers were tired of me being down, so they planned a fun night out to cheer me up." "Why would you do that? We talked about our relationship and you shouldn't be lonely while Lance is home." She quickly apologized, looking concerned. "Matt, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it that way. That was thoughtless of me. Please forgive me." A tear slipped from my eye, and she gently wiped it away, kissing my head and wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "If you haven't been out, what have you been doing? Working, going home, playing online games, or taking my bike out for rides? The rides helped keep me sane." She perked up, not angry but excited. "You have a bike? A motorbike?" "Yes, I have a Yamaha R1. She ran to check the calendar. "Can you take next Sunday off work, Matt?" "I think so. If not, someone might swap with me." "Great. Let's go out for the day on your bike, just the two of us." "I'll need to get you some gear, T," she interrupted me. "No need. I have my own gear. We had a bike before moving here and I kept my gear in the garage. Please, Matt. I promise to be really nice if you take me out." Surprised, I agreed, and she danced around her kitchen like a little kid. I felt happy. "I can't change here and you can't pick me up here. That's a big ask." Can I drive to your place to get changed? I thought about the questions my grandma would ask and decided to go for the day out. Because of the holidays, we were both busy at work, only catching up for a single night as we enjoyed each other's company. I was excited for the Sunday ride and hoped the weather would be nice. Unfortunately, I couldn't get Saturday night off, but I managed to get Sunday night. Luckily, we only had a single call early in the shift, so I got some sleep. I jumped into bed for a couple of hours Sunday morning after getting home and woke up to a clear blue sky. The weather was perfect. Anne texted me to say she was on her way, so I started putting on my leathers. I brought up Anne's visit with my grandmother. Gran, I have a friend coming over to ride with me. She needs to change here. I assume this is the girl you've been thinking about for weeks. I know because I see her perfume on your clothes when I do your laundry. Yep, you caught me there, Gran. I'm excited to meet the woman who has your heart. I felt my face get warm and went to change. After I was ready, I stepped outside just as Anne arrived. She parked her car and ran up the driveway. I opened my arms for a hug, but she ran right past me. Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. I can't wait to ride it. She touched the bike and smiled playfully. I smiled back, shaking my head. Then she came over and gave me a quick kiss, but her eyes wandered to the house where Gran stood at the door. Anne walked up with me and introduced herself as my girlfriend. My Gran welcomed her, saying she was happy to meet the woman who had won my heart. Anne handed me her keys, and I grabbed her riding gear from the car while she talked to Gran. I showed her to my bedroom so she could change. Gran looked at me with concern. I walked to her and wrapped my arms around her. What's wrong? Please be careful, Matt. I don't want you to get hurt. Gran, I will. You know I always watch out for careless drivers while riding. That's not what I mean, and you know it. I let her go, and she went into the kitchen. I stepped outside and started the bike to warm it up while I waited for Anne. 5 minutes later, she came out waving at Gran. I stood in awe as she walked up to me. She giggled and gently closed my mouth with her hand. What's wrong? Have you never seen someone dressed to ride? You're dressed to ride, but so much more than that. You look fierce. I think even my Gran would be impressed. She playfully hit my arm and kissed me again. Well, today I'm just out to capture one heart, so he better take me out as promised. We put on our helmets, hopped on the bike, and took off, her arms wrapped around me as we rode through my favorite roads in the New Forest. After about 90 minutes, we stopped at a biker cafe for some tea and snacks. As we walked to find a table, I noticed every guy's eyes on her as she walked confidently to sit down. I went and waited in line to get us both some coffee. Anne smiled at me, and I could see she was really happy. It felt like being with a child at a fun fair for the first time. We talked about the ride, and I complimented her on being a great passenger. I suddenly needed to use the restroom, so I excused myself and found a cubicle since the urinals were busy. Wow, did you see that woman in the tight black leathers? One guy said. Yeah, I think everyone in the parking lot noticed, another added. I'd trade my bike just to spend some time with her. Exactly, we all would. I chuckled at their conversation as they washed their hands. They mentioned how lucky her partner was to have her. Walking back to Anne, I was grinning. She teased me when I got close. What made you so happy? Did you get lucky in the restroom? Yes, I did. I heard 2 guys saying I was lucky. She seemed to think about it while sipping her coffee. Is that so? I've always wanted my own bike. She had a mischievous smile, and I wondered what she was thinking. Where are they? I nodded toward a group of guys nearby. She turned to look just as laughter erupted from their table. They were all laughing except the guy who made the earlier comment, who seemed embarrassed. We finished our coffee and she went to the ladies' room. I felt like everyone was watching her walk by, her leather outfit hugging her curves. When she returned, she had her leather jacket tied around her waist. There was a low buzz of conversation as she came out, and it seemed like everyone was looking at her. She wore a white tank top that didn't conceal much. Instead of coming straight to me, she walked over to the group of guys who had joked about her before. I felt uneasy and stood up, wondering if she was really going to talk to them. As she approached them, she walked around their bikes, gently touching the seats and controls. Standing in front of the row of bikes, Anne smiled and addressed the group. Nice bikes, guys. So, who rides which one? Immediately, everyone started talking at once, all trying to get her attention, almost like excited school kids. It was a bit comical, but her focus landed on the bike she was interested in, and she walked over to it. As she ran her hand along the bike's shiny paintwork, the group quieted down, sensing that she was about to say something important. I've always wanted one of these, she said, her voice thoughtful. Whose bike is this? She already knew the answer, and the group turned to the guy who had made a comment earlier in the restroom, his face turning beet red. Mind if I sit on it? I'm curious if it's too big for me. I've only ever tried smaller ones before. Her comment had a playful tone, and there were a few chuckles from the group. I could feel the direction this conversation was taking and wasn't thrilled about it. The bike was a modern Triumph Thruxton, a bike that you sit more upright on, unlike my sportier model. Can I sit on it? It seems quite large, she said with a sly smile. The guy, now trying to act cool, grinned and said, Go ahead. You look like you can handle it. It had become a game, and everyone was watching as if it were a tennis match. Anne swung her leg over the saddle, steadying the bike as she moved it from side to side. With a mock frown, she said, Now that I'm sitting on it, it doesn't feel as big as I expected. I'm almost a little disappointed. The group burst into laughter except for the bike's owner, who turned red again. Anne, noticing his discomfort, threw him a lifeline. Can I start it up? Maybe it'll feel different once it's running. Sure, go ahead. Keys are in the ignition. Just pull the clutch and hit the starter. Following his instructions, the bike roared to life. Anne playfully revved the engine, exaggerating her reaction as if the sound was overwhelming. She laughed, her head tilting back dramatically while she continued to rev the throttle, entertaining the group. It was a scene straight out of a movie, and the onlookers watched, amazed by her theatrics. After a few moments, she turned off the bike and fanned herself, pretending to catch her breath. Wow, that was something else. It didn't seem so powerful at first, but that engine really packs a punch. She got off the bike and walked back toward its owner, then accidentally dropped the keys right in front of him. She giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Oops, that was clumsy of me. She bent down to pick up the keys, pausing briefly as she stood up, giving him a teasing smile. With a playful look, she gently patted his thigh and said, Thanks for letting me try it out. It was definitely an experience. I really like your bike. I would like to buy it. Do you have a price in mind? People around them took notice, whispering to each other as they gathered. He looked very red and stammered, Don't know. I've never really thought about it. She stood up and said, Everything has a price. Tell me what it is. We could see he was confused, and his friend answered for him. Just before you came over, he said he'd trade you his bike for a little fun together. Everyone fell silent and turned to her. She put her finger to her lips as if she was thinking it over. I thought she was just pretending, but I wasn't sure. Then she spoke playfully. So, if I give you some attention, I can have your bike? The crowd murmured in approval. He decided to be brave and looked her in the eye. Yeah, I would actually trade it for some time with you. His glance shifted to me, and he could tell I was uncomfortable. I started to doubt it was a joke. Is it a fair deal? She asked me directly. I was uneasy, and I felt a knot in my stomach, sensing she might be serious. It's your choice. You have to decide if it's worth it, she said, noticing my concern. She reached out to the guy, inviting him to stand, and stepped close to him. Someone quietly said, Wow, and I noticed she was being quite affectionate with him. I began to step forward to intervene, but then she turned, walked toward me, and wrapped her arms around my neck. We shared a quick kiss that surprised everyone nearby. Thanks for the offer, but I have everything I need right here. I let out a deep breath, realizing it was all a joke, and she had played me too. Some of the others still didn't get it and started to crowd around her. She laughed heartily with those who understood, and even the guy she had joked with was smiling. We chatted with the group for a little longer. Most seemed eager to be close to her. Eventually, we waved goodbye and began to head back to our table for our helmets. The guy she joked with called out to me, Hang on a second. I paused while Anne went to grab our helmets, and he walked up to me. Can I give you some advice? Keep your girlfriend close. She's truly special. If I had someone like her, I would always worry someone would take her away. Yeah, I agree, I replied as I turned to leave. What he didn't know was that she wasn't my girlfriend, and I was the one wondering if I could keep her close. We stood by the bike, and she giggled. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Did you see their face? Yes, I did. Speaking of faces, yours got a bit serious. Please tell me you didn't think I was serious. I can honestly say I got to a point where I wasn't sure. She playfully punched my arm and I pretended it hurt. Leaning closer, she whispered, "You know it's just you. No one else matters." I stepped back. "That's not true. Don't forget about Lance." I had a hint of bitterness in my voice. "I'm sorry, that came out wrong. Lance is my husband, but besides him, there will always be you." I felt a cloud of worry forming in my mind. She noticed and tried to lighten the mood. "I've enjoyed the ride so far. Let's not spoil it. I want you to take me for a thrilling ride to get my energy up." "Best we get back then?" "No, silly, on the bike." I knew what she meant, so it was my turn to tease her. We put our gear back on and climbed onto the R1. Looking in the mirrors, I saw a crowd watching us, eyes wide, some even filming. We got back on the road and I opened up the throttle. The front wheel lifted in a wheelie as she held on tight, squealing under her helmet. I turned inland to find some good roads, speeding up and navigating sharp turns. We often reached high speeds. During it all, she either squealed or held onto me tightly, leaning in close. Eventually, I pulled into a pub, hungry for some food. As soon as I took off my helmet, her arms wrapped around my neck and we shared a quick, passionate kiss until she pulled away. "Oh my God, do they have rooms here?" "I don't think so. Why do you ask?" "Because that ride left me wanting more." She looked eager and I realized she was serious. "Sorry, but we have to eat first," I said. She pouted a bit as we walked over to a garden table. We got comfortable, but this time she only zipped her jacket down halfway. We checked the menu and I headed to the bar to order food and drinks. When I returned, she took my hands in hers. "Matt, I never want this day to end. I've loved every moment." With the guy's comment from earlier in my mind, I said, "You can do that, Anne, if you leave Lance. We could make every day like this." She pulled her hands back suddenly, her happy expression fading. "I'm not doing that, Matt. You know that won't happen. I enjoy our time together, but I won't cross that line. If that's what you're expecting, then take me home right now." I realized I had made a mistake. I smiled, trying to hide my worries and make the moment lighter. "You're probably right. At least I don't end up with all the DIY chores that my married friends have to do. All I get is the fun stuff." I leaned across the table and kissed her, hoping to ease the tension. Luckily, just then our meals arrived. After we ate, the mood was better. We sat with our drinks for a bit and then Anne moved to my side of the table. I turned around on the bench seat to face her. Anne sat close to me, wrapping her arms around my neck and giving me soft kisses. She took out her phone and snapped a selfie of us and we stayed like that for a few moments. "Time to go," she said with a smile. We put on our helmets and I got on my motorcycle, feeling a bit uneasy. Anne climbed on behind me and playfully touched my back. She leaned close and I could hear her soft laughter. "Be careful with that. You might accidentally bump the tank." I shook my head and we pulled back onto the road, taking it a bit slower this time. When we reached the busier road into Bournemouth, we got caught in a line of stopped cars. One good thing about the bike is that we could weave through the traffic, so I started to move between the cars. I could see drivers glancing at us as we passed. We went by a convertible with a couple inside, but we had to stop because of a caravan blocking the way. I noticed the man in the car staring at us, and soon I saw the couple start to argue. "Matt, traffic's moving," Anne said, and I quickly shifted gears to get us home safely. When we arrived, Grandma was out. Anne changed clothes, hopped in her car, and headed home. I put the bike away, changed clothes, and then drove over to Anne's house. I parked around the corner to be discreet before walking in. I was feeling a bit lost. Anne stood in her living room in her leather outfit, but she had swapped out her boots for high-heeled shoes. "I'm interested in making a deal for your bike," she said, her voice smooth and inviting. "Sorry, but it's not for sale. But I really, really like it and want it." "No, it's not for sale." She stepped closer, now just a foot away from me. The woman stood in front of me, slowly undoing the zipper of her leathers. "Please, I really want it," she said with a playful smile. I swallowed hard and replied, "It's not for sale. There are plenty of others out there for sale, but not this one." "But I want yours," she insisted. "Come on, name your price." "All right," I joked. "How about £1,000,000? She raised an eyebrow, smirking. So it is for sale, though that's a bit pricey. As she slid her arms out of her leathers, I stood there uncertain if she was serious or just playing along. It's worth that much to me, I said. If you don't want it, you can always find another bike. Well, I'd pay $1 million, but it'll have to be in installments, maybe 1,000 at a time, she teased, continuing to take off her gear. The leathers fell to the floor, revealing her in simple white clothes. She looked at me with a grin. So, can we strike a deal? You can have this and maybe we work something out. I chuckled nervously. Where do we go from here? I asked. Fair's fair, she said. You let me touch the bike, so maybe I let you touch something too. She took my hand and placed it gently on her shoulder, giving me a playful look. Her teasing words hung in the air, but I didn't quite know how to respond. At that moment, I realized this was just playful banter, but it was getting a bit out of hand. We stood there for a few moments longer, the energy between us shifting back to a more light-hearted tone. We laughed it off, and the moment passed as we both relaxed, knowing the conversation had gone far enough. Anne wrapped her arms around me and pulled me close. After a sweet kiss, she whispered in my ear, I want my bike and logbook in the garage by tomorrow night. I pulled her closer and replied, We made a deal, and you agreed to the rules. She looked serious. You don't even have a license, I said. It doesn't matter. I can sit in the garage and make the engine roar. When I'm ready, I'll let you take me out. No way, you're joking. I'm serious. I've done my part, so you need to do yours. Bike, logbook, garage, tomorrow night. You're really serious, aren't you? Yep. We stared at each other for a moment, and then she burst into laughter. I got you again! You're so easy to trick, this is going to be fun! Easy to trick? I hadn't accepted everything yet, I had just begun. I playfully nudged her across the floor until we reached the sofa. I twirled her around and playfully made her kneel. She leaned against the back of the sofa, and I stepped away for a moment, shaking my head at the playful exchange. Minutes passed, and I felt the energy between us building. Anne was full of surprises, and she had a teasing sparkle in her eyes. I think I'll find all the bikers and start my own motorcycle shop, she said with a grin. I knew what she hinted at, and I couldn't help but laugh at the thought. We were exhausted from the events of the day, but it was a happy exhaustion. Where did all that energy come from, Anne? I asked, curious. It felt exciting to tease those guys while pretending I could barter, she admitted. The look in their eyes really got to me. Wait, you're not actually thinking of... I started. Oh no, let's keep that as a fun fantasy, she interrupted. Thank goodness for that. She pouted playfully. But I still want my R1 in the garage by tomorrow night. I jumped up, picked her up playfully, and gave her a gentle tap. She laughed, and soon we were both tired from the fun we had together as well as our bike ride. After some time, we took a refreshing shower together and came back downstairs. Anne planned to cook, but we decided to grab a takeaway instead. Then we settled in to watch a movie, happy and content. We decided to watch Wonder Woman with Gal Gadot. As the credits rolled, I leaned in and kissed her. You're just as beautiful as she is, actually, even more so, I said. She smiled playfully. It's too late for flattery. You've already caught me off guard, so you can stop with the sweet talk. We continued to kiss. Honestly, you're way more stunning. Come on, you should have saved that for another time. Well, that's what happens when you really care about someone. I noticed her flinch a little when I slowed down. She sensed it and quickly replied. And I really care about you too. We both knew how we felt, but neither of us could admit it. Doing so would risk the fragile connection we had. I spent the night, but nothing more happened. We simply cuddled up together. To anyone watching, we would have seemed like a loving couple, but underneath, we were facing our own struggles. In the following months, we experienced a mix of activities together. Bike rides, cozy nights in, and plenty of close moments. The only challenge was that a big change was coming, and it was named Lance. As the day approached for his return, I found it hard to come to terms with it, and she noticed my change in mood. On our last evening together before his return, Anne messaged me not to be late. She promised to cook dinner. After a tough day at work, knowing it would be our last time together for 3 weeks made me hesitate about going over. I kept telling myself to stay calm during the drive. When I arrived, the delicious smell of steaks greeted me. The table was beautifully set, and a bottle of red wine was waiting. I expected Anne to be dressed up for the evening, but she looked a bit rushed. When she saw my expression, she apologized. "I'm sorry, I had a crazy day at work and didn't have time to change. I chose to make dinner instead. Honestly, I'm starving." "It's fine," I replied. "My day was tough too, so it's all good." We enjoyed the fantastic meal Anne prepared, chatting about work and the weather. The atmosphere felt a bit tense, and we both knew why. After we cleaned up, we sat back to enjoy the last of the wine. She leaned in to give me a soft kiss, and I reached out to gently touch her shoulder. She responded positively to my gesture, and the chemistry between us lingered. Then she pulled back. A playful sparkle in her eyes gave her away. "Okay, detective, you figured me out. I didn't dress up because I have something special planned for you. I'm going upstairs to change." "Wait until I call you," Anne said. "Don't come up before, or you'll spoil the surprise." About 20 minutes later, she called for me to come upstairs. As I went up, I noticed that the master bedroom, not the spare room, was open. I hesitated outside the door. "Anne, are you sure about this?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "I want to show you that I'm as committed to you as I am to Lance. I think this will prove it." I stepped inside, and there was a surprising scene waiting for me. Anne had put together a playful setup dressed as Wonder Woman, tied to the bed with scarves and handcuffs. She had fully embraced the role, diving into a bit of light-hearted role play. "Help me!" she called out dramatically. "They've captured me! Who knows what they'll do to me?" We hadn't planned this, so I had to decide whether to play the hero or the villain. I chose to be the villain for a bit of fun. "Oh, Wonder Woman, it's me who's captured you. But don't worry, I'm here to rescue you from the dullness of everyday life." She stayed in character. "Oh no, I'm an Amazon warrior. I can't give in to a mere mortal like you." She pretended to struggle against her bonds, adding to the playfulness of the moment. I decided to keep things light, responding to her over-the-top performance. "But you will," I said, continuing the playful banter. "You'll find joy so deep, you'll never seek anything else again." I moved toward her, kissing her shoe and slowly working my way up her leg, maintaining the fun and imaginative tone of the game. "Please stop," she cried out, still in character. "I'm Wonder Woman. You can't defeat me." The light atmosphere was clear as she giggled while trying to keep the act going. We both understood it was just a fun moment between us, not meant to be taken seriously. Eventually, we both broke character, laughing together at how far the playful scene had gone. The role play came to an end with laughter and lightness, showing how comfortable we were with each other, even in the most unexpected moments. It was a reminder of the trust and bond we shared. My fingers gently moved over her, teasing and building the tension. Her body responded, arching slightly as she struggled playfully against the bonds that held her. Her breath came in soft gasps, a mix of anticipation and frustration. "Please, don't stop," she whispered, her voice full of need. I paused for a moment, letting the suspense hang in the air, drawing out the moment. She squirmed beneath me, desperate for the release she was so close to reaching. I started again, slowly, carefully, keeping the rhythm steady. Each time she seemed on the verge of losing herself in the sensation, I paused, pulling her back just before she reached the edge. This back and forth continued for a while, her body glistening with the effort as she breathed heavily, her muscles tense with expectation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I let her find release. Her whole body tensed and she gasped as the waves of sensation overtook her. She clung to the moment, her body shaking as she let go, her breaths coming fast and shallow. When it was over, she collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but content. I leaned down to kiss her gently, the intensity of the moment fading into a peaceful stillness. We stayed like that for a while, resting, both of us feeling the quiet connection between us. It was a moment of shared trust, the kind that deepened the bond we had built over time. I wasn't trying to rescue Wonder Woman. I was trying to show that I was with Lance as the main partner, not just a sidekick in this unusual situation. I continued for about 10 minutes, but then I felt drained. I leaned down, resting my weight on her, and we both caught our breath for a moment. After a little while, I noticed she seemed uncomfortable, so I moved aside and untied her. I lay down next to her on the bed. As I stared at the ceiling, a tear fell from my eye. "I'm sorry," I whispered softly. "It's okay. I understand. It's tough for both of us, but it's just for 3 weeks." We've done this before and we can manage again. Yeah, I know, that doesn't change how I feel. I can't just turn off my feelings and pretend everything is fine while I picture you with him. Matt, I know this is hard, but if you care for me, you'll get through this. Think about us together at New Year's. I want it to be a special moment for both of us. I knew what she wanted to say, but neither of us dared to say it out loud. We recognized that saying those words could change everything, though I wasn't sure what that change would mean. This thought created a heavy silence between us. We tried to ignore it as we cuddled and silently fell asleep with Anne's arm wrapped around me. I woke up in the dark, feeling a slight motion. As I came to my senses, I realized Anne was next to me. I reached out to hold her, feeling the warmth and comfort of her presence. We lay there together for a while, not speaking, before deciding to shower together. The mood felt heavy and overshadowed as we had breakfast, unsure how to talk to one another. We both started speaking at the same time, so I let her go first. Matt, this time shouldn't be as hard. I'll have my phone at work, and I promise I'll stay in touch as much as I can. It might not be every day, but I'll reach out whenever I can. That brought a small smile to my face. Please don't stay home feeling sad, Matt. I want you to have a good time. It will help ease my mind knowing you're okay. I promise it won't change what we have. I nodded, but knew I wouldn't go out. I would wait it out. I need to go. We stood up and she hugged me tightly as we shared a gentle kiss, which felt like a long goodbye. It's been 3 weeks, but we can do this, my dear. Trust me, we'll be together for the new year. I promise it will be special, something you won't forget. I kissed her one last time and felt a deep emptiness inside. I realized Lance was back, and Anne had taken a few days off to be with him. She returned to work, and I hoped she would call on her secret phone stored at her job. Sure enough, around midday, she called. I answered, expecting to feel joy at hearing her voice, but instead I heard her crying. Matt, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I promise. It felt like my heart was being squeezed tightly, but I needed to understand. What didn't you know? Lance is here for 5 weeks, not just 3. He planned a trip for us to Mexico for 10 days before Christmas to catch up with family. He arranged some time off for me as a surprise. I swear I didn't know. Her sobs made it hard for her to speak clearly. It's okay. We can't control everything. I'm working on Christmas and covering shifts for others during the holidays. Just remember, I have an IOU for New Year, and I plan to collect. I wanted to comfort her, and although my words were meant to be reassuring, I was hurting inside too. But I knew there was nothing I could do. In the weeks that followed, we managed to have a few conversations and even exchanged some playful photos. I wore my fireman's uniform, and she sent me pictures in her nurse's outfit, not quite the standard dress code. Then I got a message saying she would be off the next day for vacation and would catch up in the new year. The message was full of sad emoji faces and hearts. I didn't reply, knowing she was leaving and I would spend the next 3 weeks by myself. I threw myself into work, covered shifts, stayed home, played some online games, and took out my motorcycle when the weather allowed. I was managing, but I felt like I was sinking into a thick sadness. In the fire service, your team feels like family. The guys gave me a hard time, but they knew I was in a tricky relationship, just not the details. I took on as many holiday shifts for others as I could, but no one let me cover a New Year's Eve shift. I didn't want to sit at home with my grandmother and her friends, so the guys from the station insisted I join them for a night out. Most places had tickets required for the night, so I gave the guys money for tickets and went along with them. My heart wasn't really in it, but I tried to enjoy myself. Around midnight, we found ourselves at a club hosting a Blues and Twos night, and it was packed. It felt like everyone around me was enjoying the celebration, dressing up and having fun. I, on the other hand, felt empty and alone. While the others danced, I stayed at the bar, feeling sorry for myself and drinking. Once I broke the seal to use the restroom, I realized I couldn't stop going back and forth. As the countdown to midnight began, I decided to push my way through the crowd to the bathroom. The big screen showed Big Ben striking midnight, and I noticed people around me hugging and celebrating. Suddenly, I stopped in my tracks. Right in front of me was Anne, her arms around Lance, sharing a kiss. He was dressed as Superman, and she was in a Wonder Woman costume, the same one she had told me was just for me. Seeing this made my anger surge. When she finally opened her eyes and looked at me, I could see fear spreading across her face. I knew I had to move. I pushed past them, bumping into Lance. He called me a jerk, but I kept walking, trying to avoid a fight. I rushed into the men's room and shouted in frustration. I paced around while others gave me space. Then someone touched my shoulder, and in a moment of anger, I turned and swung my arm. It was Anne. Tears streamed down her face. All I could do was ask why as I gestured towards her costume. "You said this was for me. You promised." I pushed her hand away, and when she reached out to hug me, I stepped back. We both cried. "Please, Matt, hold me. It will all work out," she said. I stepped back until I hit the sink. Then in a burst of frustration, I punched the mirror. The glass shattered, and moments later, 2 bouncers rushed in. They grabbed me and dragged me out of the club and onto the street. My last sight of Anne was her kneeling on the bathroom floor, crying. Lance. As the clock struck midnight, Anne and I were in a close embrace, sharing a kiss. Suddenly, I felt her tense and freeze. When I opened my eyes, I saw sheer fear on her face. Just then, someone pushed past us. I looked back at Anne, but she was staring at the floor and couldn't meet my gaze. "Sorry, love, I need to go to the restroom. I'll be back in a moment." She walked away quickly. I sensed something was very wrong in our marriage. It took some time for her to come back, and I could see she had been crying. I asked her what happened and why she took so long. She said there was a long line for the ladies' room, and while she was waiting, a drunk girl made a hurtful comment that upset her. She wanted to go home, so we did. Once we were inside, I asked her a question. "What was that all about, Anne? Tell me what's going on. Don't lie to me." She hesitated and said, "The guy who pushed by you was someone from our earlier agreement. He didn't understand the rules. He got upset then, but it wasn't a big deal. It shocked me to see him again so close to us." Anne had never lied to me since we started dating. Her face showed signs of worry. I remembered my past experiences where I had to figure out what was true. I was determined to get to the bottom of this. "Okay, Anne, be honest. Have you broken any of the 3 rules? Please don't lie." She stayed quiet, and tears streamed down her face. "No, I haven't," she whispered. "He just didn't understand. I didn't tell you because we promised not to talk about our separate lives. I followed the rules. Please believe me." I pressed again. "Tell me face to face. Did you break any of the rules we agreed on?" She was crying now. "No, he just didn't get it. I followed the rules. Lance, please, let's go to bed. I need you." We went upstairs, and she jumped into my arms. In the morning, I sensed something was off. I decided I would uncover the truth and deal with it. While drinking my coffee and waiting for her to finish showering, I wondered where to start. The old calendar and new one were on the table, and Anne always noted important dates like birthdays and car details. As I flipped through the months, I noticed a phone number written on a Saturday with 8 p.m. by it. It wasn't Anne's handwriting, but it could have been an innocent note about a gathering with friends. I called my friend Des and asked if his wife could call that number, pretending to be from a call center. I just needed to know if a man or woman answered. A few hours later, I got my answer. Now, I needed to figure out who this person was. After a week, I decided to call the number. I bought a pay-as-you-go SIM card and used that. A man answered. "Happy New Year. Who's this?" he asked. "Oh, come on, it's just you playing a prank again." I laughed. "Who are you?" "It's John. Quit messing around." "Which John? This is Matt." "Matt Jones or Matt Williams?" "No, Matt Andrews." "Oh no, I'm really sorry. I called the wrong number." I hung up, but now I had a name. It didn't take long to find him. Our world is full of digital information. I found him on Facebook. The sneaky guy. He had a picture from a bike event. In the background, I saw Anne in a leather jacket chatting with some bikers. I understood what that picture meant. Now, I needed solid proof. While Anne was at work, I searched for more clues. The only thing I found was some underwear I didn't recognize, but I couldn't be sure what that meant. I went online and ordered some discreet cameras. I set one up in the living room and one in our bedroom. They would send me alerts if they detected motion, and they recorded 30-second clips. That would be enough time to gather what I needed. When Anne returned, I shared some bad news. I had to go back to the base a few days early. It had happened before, so it wasn't surprising. She was working that night, and we shared a close moment during the day. Most people wouldn't notice any change in her, but I could tell something was bothering her. I left, but didn't go back to the base. Instead, I checked into a hotel across town to wait. Mad, I was thrown out of the nightclub and ended up on the street. I thought I heard the word police, but I was too angry to care as I pictured them together. I decided to confront them. A man passing by stopped to talk to me. "Hey, your hand is bleeding." I looked down and saw cuts on my knuckles with bits of glass sparkling in the light. I didn't mind. 2 police cars arrived and went inside. One of the bouncers who had thrown me out came outside with the police. They were looking for me. I slipped back into the shadows and saw Anne and Lance leave. They jumped into a taxi. I had to stay hidden to avoid getting caught by the police, as that could cost me my job. I went to the hospital to get my hand checked. It was a busy night, and I didn't leave until 5 a.m. My cuts were cleaned, and I got several stitches along with some strong pain relievers. I went home and fell asleep, needing rest since I was back at work that night. Later, while at work, my phone rang. It was Anne. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't know you were there. I thought you were at work, and Lance surprised me with tickets for the night. We had just come home that morning." She was crying softly as she said this. "But why are you wearing that outfit? You said it was only for me." I was upset, and she could hear it in my voice. I felt like I had no choice. When Lance surprised me with the tickets, I mentioned I didn't have a costume. He found it in the drawer and insisted I would look amazing in it. I didn't want to let him down. She started to sob. "Please, Matt, forgive me. I promise it won't be long, and I'll be back with you soon." I was still angry as I replied, "Let me calm down before you call me again. It feels like you took a part of my heart." I believed her, but the pain was hard to bear. The sobbing grew louder, and then she hung up. A few days later, I got a message on my phone. "Lance is leaving tomorrow. He was supposed to stay longer, but now he was going earlier." The thought of them being together before he left filled me with frustration and sadness. I was shaken from these thoughts when the station commander asked to see me. We sat in his office, and he explained that he couldn't let any issues disrupt our team. We were all like family, and he wanted to support us. I thanked him and explained that my situation was personal, and I would try to keep work and my personal life separate. He smiled kindly and warned me to resolve my issues or he would have to step in. In a way, I needed that reminder to pay attention to my feelings. Being apart from Anne felt unbearable, and I knew I had to talk to her. At that moment, our paths were at a crossroads, and I wanted us to choose wisely. A few days later, she called me. Lance had left, and she wanted to meet. We decided to meet at the pub near the club we used to go to. My voice was still filled with anger, while hers sounded full of regret. That evening, when I walked in, I saw her at the same table we had sat at before. She was wearing a red and black patterned skirt and a soft gray top. She looked over at me, nervously biting her lip. As I walked toward her, I felt my anger start to fade. When I sat down and saw her beautiful face, I remembered how I felt the first time we met almost a year ago. She reached across the table and I took her hands in mine. As she touched the spot where she had hit the mirror, she looked down for a moment before meeting my gaze. "Why, Matt? That was really foolish." I sighed deeply. "If I hadn't hit the mirror, I might have taken my anger out on you or gone after Lance. You hurt me just moments before that when I saw you both. I was so angry." Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks, but she held back from crying loudly. Her voice was shaky as she said, "Those two worlds shouldn't mix. You promised you wouldn't be there. I didn't plan this. Lance did. I thought it would be fine, but when I saw you, it made me feel sick. I wanted to disappear when I saw your face. Please come back with me so we can work this out." With teary eyes, I shook my head. "Let's give it a couple of days. I still need to deal with this anger. Are you working early in 2 days?" She nodded while trying not to cry. "Okay. Can I come around 6? I can bring some food and we can figure things out from there." She nodded again. I started to get up, but she held my hands tightly. "Please don't leave me. I don't want you to go." She was doing her best to stay strong. I gently pulled my hands away and lifted her chin to meet my gaze. "I have to go, but I'll see you in 2 days. With sadness in her eyes, she replied, "That's not what I meant." I nodded, kissed her on the cheek, and walked away. A couple of evenings later, I picked up some Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. I parked around the corner from Anne's house and took my usual route inside. She was dressed in a bright red dress, her hair neatly arranged, and her makeup done beautifully. When we kissed, It felt different, more careful than usual, as if we were both afraid of making things worse. We talked about work. When she asked what I had been up to, it felt casual, not too personal. I didn't mention her time away, and she understood that we should avoid that topic. After finishing one bottle of wine and starting a second, the atmosphere changed a bit back to how it used to be. Anne, feeling a little tipsy, moved closer to me, gently running her fingers down my arm and kissing my neck softly. "I'm going to go upstairs. Give me 10 minutes, then come join me if you want," she said with a playful smile. We shared a kiss, and then she walked upstairs with a light-hearted sway. I listened for about 10 minutes and then heard silence. After a moment, I went upstairs, finding only Anne and Lance's bedroom lit by candles. I stepped inside, and there stood Anne, dressed in a playful outfit, smiling. She stood there, her legs covered in red stockings with seams running up the back, and her feet in glossy red high heels. A small red and white G-string, trimmed with fluffy fabric, barely covered her. She wore a red basque with white frills, and long red PVC gloves that stretched up her slender arms. "Merry Christmas, love," she said with a soft smile. "This is just for you." She hesitated, realizing the sensitive weight of her words, and added, "I'm sorry. We have some things to make up for." We embraced, sharing a long, warm kiss before she gently guided me down onto the bed. I lay there, watching her as she knelt on the bed and slowly made her way up towards me. She started placing soft kisses on my legs, working her way up with a tenderness that was both comforting and intimate. Her movements were slow and deliberate, and I could feel the care she was putting into each moment. After a while, she stopped and looked up at me, her gaze full of affection. Without breaking eye contact, she smiled and continued to kiss me softly, taking her time, allowing us to reconnect and rebuild what had been missing. As we continued, she paused and sat up with a playful tone, asking, "How are you feeling now?" I nodded, appreciating the closeness we were sharing. She smiled warmly, adding, "Let's make this Christmas special." She shifted her position, pulling me close once again, and we spent the rest of the evening together, enjoying each other's company. There was no rush, no pressure, just the simple pleasure of being together. It was a quiet moment, full of warmth and the feeling of new beginnings. Without warning, she moved closer and settled into a comfortable rhythm, her movements fluid and steady. She quietly adjusted her position, her breathing deepening as she gently swayed. Her focus was entirely on the moment, and the room was filled only with the soft sound of her movements and our increasingly heavy breaths. As she moved, her eyes closed, and the connection between us deepened. For a long while, we stayed like that, her hands resting on my chest for support as we both caught our breath, the intensity of the moment fading into a shared quiet. She looked down at me, smiling softly, her hair falling loosely over her face. The smile turned playful, and she gently shifted her position, moving closer. She leaned in and whispered, "I want us to stay connected. Can we?" I nodded, understanding her request, and we stayed close, simply enjoying the quiet after everything. The warmth of the moment was all we needed as we held each other, the world outside feeling far away. But suddenly, everything changed. Without warning, I felt a sharp tug, and in an instant, I was yanked out of the peaceful moment. Before I could process what was happening, I was pulled roughly from the bed, crashing hard into the wardrobe. Pain shot through my body as my head slammed against the doors, the wood splintering under the impact. Dazed, I tried to move, but a sharp kick to my side left me breathless and struggling to regain control. I heard Anne scream, panic filling her voice as she realized what was happening. The world around me was spinning, my ears ringing, and my mind raced to understand the chaos unfolding. The sounds of angry shouting filled the room, but the words were a blur, lost in the haze of confusion and pain. In that terrifying moment, everything became a whirlwind, and I could feel the danger closing in, overwhelming the peace we had just shared. I noticed a figure above me. It was Anne, trying to stop Lance from hurting me. Things settled down for a moment, except for Anne's cries as she begged him to stop. Then, a hand yanked me up by my hair, and I was face to face with Lance. I could see his anger clearly, and I feared for my life. "I'm going to drive around the block. You better get out of my house or you're going to regret it when I get back. Do you hear me?" Lance shouted. Anne was pulling on him, saying they could figure things out, but he pushed her onto the bed. You have 10 minutes to grab your things and leave. I don't care where you go, but I don't want to see you again, Lance yelled. I could see Anne flinch from his words. She reached for him, saying, All I need is you. But he slapped her and shouted, Don't you dare touch me. Then he stormed out, slamming the front door behind him. Anne was crying hard, trying to gather my clothes and help me get dressed. I felt something warm on my face, and my right eye started to swell. Please hurry, Matt. He looks so dangerous. You need to go, she urged. When I reached out to comfort her, she pushed my hand away, yelling, Just go, Matt. She sat back on the bed, tears streaming down her face. I reached out again and said, I love you, Anne. But she buried her face in her hands and cried. I realized it was over. I quickly packed my things and left, heading to my car to get as far away as I could. I didn't see Lance again. When I got home, I collapsed on my bed and cried for what I had lost. I did manage to sleep, but it was restless. I woke up early and called my boss. I asked for a few days off. He wasn't pleased, but accepted it when I explained I needed time to deal with the problems weighing on me. After the call, I turned to see my grandmother looking at me sadly, much like she did when my grandfather passed away a couple of years ago. I warned you to be careful, and look what's happened, she said. I lost it and cried as she held me close until I calmed down. She helped clean my injuries and suggested I go to the hospital since I had a painful bump on my head, a black eye, and my face was swollen. I felt a sharp pain in my ribs and stomach, and it hurt every time I breathed. I just wanted to stay inside, curl up, and feel sorry for myself. When I reached out to Anne and told her I loved her, I really believed she would take my hand and join me in starting our life together, without any problems between us. I couldn't have been more wrong. Lance. The hotel I chose was far enough from the town center so Anne wouldn't run into me. Of course, if she was nearby, she shouldn't have been there. There was nothing unusual in the security footage until I saw her get ready as if she was going out on a date. The clothes she wore were not just for comfort. She left for a few hours and came back looking a bit sad. A couple of days later, what I feared became clear. I felt my anger boil inside. This guy, Matt, walked into my house and greeted my wife as if she was his own. It was obvious she had broken the trust we agreed on to keep our relationship strong. After being apart for so long, we both knew we couldn't just stay like two birds in separate cages. Instead, we created a little space for freedom with some rules. Anne thought she could ignore those rules and do whatever she wanted. I watched the camera feed, listening until she went upstairs. That was my cue to act. I left the hotel, drove back to my house, and parked around the corner. As I approached my house, I glanced up at our bedroom window. I could see the flickering light of candles between the curtains. It felt so painful, like salt in a fresh wound. Quietly, I entered the house and made my way upstairs. I managed to peek through the gap in the door and saw them. She was sitting very close to him, and at that moment, my anger took over. I pushed the door open, grabbed onto his ankle, and pulled him away from Anne. With all my strength, I swung him through the air, and he crashed into the wardrobe, breaking the doors. Anne turned, her face full of shock, taking a deep breath as she raised her hands to her mouth. I stepped over to the man on the floor and kicked him to stop him from getting back up. There were shouts, and I kicked him again before Anne rushed off the bed and pushed against me. I knew I was close to letting my anger take over me. It wouldn't be hard to hurt him. I had done it before. But a small part of me held on to some sense. I grabbed a handful of his hair and gave him a few minutes to leave my house. The woman tried to reach for me, so I pushed her away and told her she had 10 minutes to gather her things and go. The look in her eyes showed she understood me well. I walked back outside to my car, checked the time, and drove around for a while. When I returned, he was gone, and she looked shocked. She had a suitcase, but wasn't in a hurry. I decided to help her out a bit more. I grabbed a few more bags and quickly emptied drawers, filling them with as many clothes as I could before bringing them to the front door. When I opened it, I turned to look at her. She was crying and begging me to stop and talk. I ignored her, and when she tried to grab my arm, I pushed her outside and shut the door. I noticed she didn't have her car keys, so I found her keys and purse. I took the house keys, opened the door, and threw the keys out onto the path where she was sitting and crying. After a few minutes, she started banging on the door, asking to speak to me. I just walked around the house, turned off all the lights, and grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge. I settled in and opened one. After a while, the banging stopped, and I saw her car drive away. Now I was ready to make a big change. I had a few more drinks and then went upstairs to put my plan into action. I noticed some candles had blown out during the earlier chaos. I picked up one large candle, placed it carefully below the curtains, and put some clothes nearby. I lit the candle and opened the window to let the air move the curtain. A corner of the curtain brushed against the flame. I went back downstairs, found some cleaning supplies, and poured them on the clothes and a bit on myself, too. I then sat in the chair surrounded by the empty bottles and cans from earlier. Now I just waited, thinking about my life after all this. About half an hour later, I heard the smoke alarm and stayed put in the chair. I had opened all the doors earlier, so the fire spread quickly, burning everything in its path. I started to breathe in some smoke, but I tried to remain calm for just a little longer. Suddenly, the door crashed down and 2 firefighters pulled me from the house. I was really out of it because of all the drinks I'd had. They took me to an ambulance and gave me oxygen while I watched everything go up in flames. I really had said I would bring it all down. With a bit of luck, the insurance would help, and I could move on with my life free of the burden. Matt. The next day, I looked at my phone. I wanted Anne to call or message me, but I stopped myself from reaching out. This went on for another day until I felt the need to hear her say she didn't love me. I took the R1 and went to the hospital where she worked. At the front desk, I asked if I could speak to her. "Hello, Matt. I'm Anne's friend Wendy. I've been expecting you," was her surprising reply. She called over another nurse to cover the desk and led me into an empty treatment room, motioning for me to sit down. "I thought Anne was working today," I said first. There was a moment of silence before Wendy spoke. "Anne handed in her notice yesterday due to family reasons." I started to get up, planning to go to her house, but Wendy anticipated my move. She started looking at her phone and said, "You won't find her there," before showing me some news. "House burns down due to a candle lighting a curtain. Relationship troubles to blame." I quickly skimmed the first few lines. It said Lance had been saved, but there was no mention of Anne. He had confronted her about her affair, and she had left in a rush. He sat and drank heavily, and no one thought about the candles she had lit. The rest was history. "Do you know where she is?" I asked. Wendy said Anne had gone to her home the night it all happened and hadn't returned until yesterday when she quit and left town. I unlocked my phone and called Anne, but a buzzing came from an envelope Wendy handed me. Inside was Anne's phone. The screensaver showed a picture of her sitting on my lap at the pub where we had lunch during our summer ride. We looked happy, and tears began to fall from my eyes. "How do I reach Anne, Wendy?" I asked, seeing tears welling up in her eyes, too. "You need to read the letter in the envelope, Matt. It will explain everything." I opened the letter to read. "Matt, I'm so sorry. I never thought it would end this way. I always thought you'd find someone else without the complications of our relationship, and we would drift apart with no harm done. You know what's happened. Lance kept his promise. He destroyed everything. There is nothing left for any of us now. I have to fix things with Lance. He is my husband, and we both broke the trust he had in me. We had simple rules, and I broke them all. Now I have to face the consequences. I went to find Lance and try to fix what we had, but it might be too late. Still, I have to try. You have the phone, so you know you can't reach me, and I've not left any new contact details. I'm not even sure where I'm going. All I know is that I need to find Lance and make things right. It's probably too late now, but I do love you, Matt. There were many times I wanted to tell you, but was too scared of what might happen. I may not be a genius, but I know we both felt something special. I used to wish I could be 2 different people, one for Lance and one for you, but that was just a dream. I love you, Matt, and I will never forget you, but please move on with your life. I can't come back. Love, Anne." I sat there, stunned. I couldn't cry. I just felt numb. Wendy reached out and held my hands. "Every action has a reaction and consequences. You fell in love with Anne. She fell in love with you too, but she broke her promises to Lance. When Lance found out, that's why we are here today, Matt. As hard as it is, remember this as a lesson." After a few minutes, I picked up my helmet and left, feeling empty. I don't recall the ride home. All I could think about was how to find Anne. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't find her. She really was gone. All I had were memories and Wendy's words. Every action has a reaction and consequences. I would carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life. The windshield wipers moved slowly, clearing the sleet falling from the gray winter sky. Matt watched them, feeling that they reflected the time of year when everyone realized they had eaten and drunk too much during the holidays. But Matt was down for a different reason. In the past year, he had a girlfriend, but there was a problem. Anne was married to another man, Lance, and over Christmas, he discovered their affair, which caused a big mess. Lance burned down the home he shared with Anne, and she suddenly disappeared, leaving her job with no new contact information. Matt decided to look for her, taking a week off work to find her in what he thought was her hometown. He searched all the nearby hospitals but found nothing. Sadly, he was driving home from the West Country to Bournemouth, trying to figure out his next move. The outcome was not what he expected. Matt lived with his grandma, who he believed was his only living relative. He sat in the kitchen staring at his phone while she made a pot of tea. She knew he had been involved with someone she suspected was married, but she didn't know everything. While they shared a cup of tea, the story came out about the past year, leading up to Matt coming back home 20 minutes ago after looking for Anne. She got up and moved closer to him. He looked up with tears in his eyes, hoping she would comfort him, but instead she slapped him hard on the face. Then she wrapped her arms around him, pulling him tightly to her. Matt could only cry as he felt her warmth. She was the only one who truly cared about him. "If your parents were still here, they would be so disappointed in you, Matt. Listen to yourself. You've hurt a couple's relationship, and now you only want to find this woman to what? Cause her more pain? You're just making everything worse." She was sniffling now, fighting back her own tears as she spoke to her grandson. "Look at me, Matt." He looked up at her gentle face. "Your granddad and I raised you to be a good person, just like we did with your dad. I know you faced challenges, but please, look inside yourself and understand what you've done. You have so much love to give. Find the right person, but do it without hurting anyone else. Promise me you will learn this lesson." Matt nodded, resting his head against her as she rubbed up and down his back. The sting of her slap and her words began to settle in his mind. It wasn't a sudden realization, but her tough love started to make him think. When Matt returned to work, he spoke with the fire station commander, reflecting on the past year and apologizing for his unpredictable behavior. Emergency services often faced tough situations, and it wasn't unusual for these stresses to lead to personal struggles. These challenges could sometimes ruin relationships and even leave people feeling lost. The commander understood this well and often stepped in to give support when needed. He also recognized that Matt's situation was unique. In the fire service, your crew feels like family. You can argue and have ups and downs, but you always look out for one another. Once everyone learned what had happened, they made it clear to Matt that he had been fortunate. Matt never showed that he suspected Lance had entered his home, realizing it was best to keep things quiet. He still missed Anne sometimes, especially when he went back to the Blues and Twos night at a local club where they had met. After a few months, he began to feel like himself again, but he made sure any new relationships were with single women. As summer arrived, Matt's team responded to a traffic accident on one of the busy roads cutting through the New Forest. A deer had jumped in front of a large truck traveling at 50 miles an hour. In its panic, the deer tried to leap over the massive vehicle but only managed to get hit, sending its body flying through the air and crashing into the windshield of an elderly VW bus coming from the opposite direction. The impact was deadly for the driver and the passenger in the front seat. The bus spun around and collided with the truck, but both vehicles were going too fast to avoid a disaster. The VW bus, pushed by the force of the crash, spun off the road and hit a large oak tree before coming to a halt. As the dust settled, many bystanders called for help as other cars stopped abruptly. Matt's team arrived quickly. The team leader assessed the wreckage while others gathered their tools to rescue those trapped inside the vehicles. As they approached the VW, Matt felt a heavy weight in his legs. The sight before him made him feel sick. He broke into a sweat, and his steps faltered as they got closer. "You okay, Matt?" asked James, who was carrying rescue equipment alongside him. "Sorry, I just saw something like this before. It's a bit shocking. I'm fine. Let's get to work." They moved forward as the team leader began to give instructions based on what he saw. There were 2 adults who had died in front of the vehicle, a child in the back who had also passed, and another child trapped inside, who was still alive but in critical condition. The main goal was to help that child for the paramedics and get them out of the VW quickly. If you talk to emergency workers, you'll find that children's situations deeply affect them. As the team worked professionally, each person felt the sadness and hurt from the scene they were trying to handle. In the back, a small hand reached out from the twisted metal, but it was still and wouldn't move again. In the moments between the deer hitting the VW and the VW crashing into the truck, the young girl had reached out for her older brother. Trapped in a seat, partly covered in metal from the damaged VW, was an 80-year-old boy. His body was injured and unconscious, bleeding from a visible head wound beneath the twisted metal on his chest. Matt struggled to breathe when he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the station commander. "Come on, Matt, step back. This one is not for you. We have enough people here," the commander said. Matt didn't move. He stood like a statue. "It's not a request, it's an order. Go and sit in my truck. I'll be over in a few minutes." His tone was calm but firm with understanding. Matt turned and walked away, finding the truck. He sat in the passenger seat, feeling numb and lost in thought. The commander spoke with others at the scene for a few minutes before joining Matt as they drove away. "You okay, Matt?" the commander asked. Matt nodded, staring through the windshield with a blank look. "You might not realize it, but I was in a similar place when I was a bit older than you. Sometimes I still have memories of that day. It was hard for many, but even harder for you. They say nothing good comes from a family tragedy, but I disagree. You chose to become a fireman, working hard to help others." Matt nodded again, still looking blankly out of the truck as they headed back to the station. Once back, the commander told Matt to go home and try to relax. He said to come see him in the morning when he returned to work, and they would figure things out. If they thought counseling would help, they would prioritize it. Matt changed into his clothes and rode away from the station on his Yamaha R1. He spent the next couple of hours riding along the coast to clear his mind. When he returned to Bournemouth, instead of going home, he headed to the hospital. He walked up to the emergency reception desk and asked about the boy from the accident a few hours earlier in the New Forest. The receptionist asked him to wait while she made a call. Soon, a woman approached him. "Are you a relative?" she asked. Matt shook his head and showed her his fire service ID, explaining that he had been called to help because of the emergency. The stress in his voice was clear. She reached out and touched his arm. "Come with me, and we can talk." He followed her to a small room with a couple of chairs and a table where they sat. There was a kettle and enough supplies to make a couple of cups of tea. After starting the kettle, she sat down at the table next to Matt and said softly, "It would be nice to introduce ourselves, don't you think?" He nodded and told her his name, mentioning he wanted to check on the boy from the crash. "All right, Matt. My name is Tanya and I work with the Special Investigations team. The station is short on staff, so I was asked to come here to gather information and be the first contact for the family. They are from Liverpool, and we have contacted their relatives who should arrive here later this evening." When Matt heard from Liverpool, he realized the young boy was not going to make it. He folded his arms on the table and rested his head, sobbing heavily. It felt like the emotional wounds he thought had healed were suddenly raw again, leading him back to a painful time 10 years ago. Tanya walked behind him, gently ran her fingers through his hair, and placed her hands on his shoulders, leaning in close. She softly whispered in his ear, "Whatever it is, Matt, let it all out." He began to sob even harder, and they stayed that way for a few minutes until he started to regain his composure. She made a couple of cups of tea, sat back in her chair, and for the first time in his life, Matt opened up to another person. He began by sharing what he called Day Zero. That day was filled with darkness, pain, and fear. The only thing he could see was his brother's still and bloodied hand. But then firemen rescued him from the wreckage that had taken his mom, dad, and younger brother. They had set off early one February morning for a flight to Tenerife for a family vacation. Their car hit a patch of ice, spun out, and crashed into a tree, crumpling the car. His dad and brother died instantly, and his mom passed away soon after. They told Matt he was lucky to survive, but as a young boy, he didn't feel lucky at all. He felt like he had lost everything. Matt shared how he moved in with his grandparents, who raised him as their own son from the age of 8. His granddad was a kind man who treated him like his own son. Matt loved spending time with him, especially bonding over motorcycles, even though his grandma worried about it. 4 years ago, his granddad passed away from a heart problem. This was hard for both Matt and his grandma, but they helped each other through their sadness. Since he was rescued, Matt had always dreamed of being a firefighter, and he followed that dream when he joined the fire brigade at 18. He went to the National Fire Training School at Morton-in-the-Marsh, where he did really well and finished at the top of his class before starting at the Central Fire Station in Bournemouth. Matt talked about the previous year and his experience with Anne, sharing his regret about how it affected her and her husband. He also mentioned how he had grown as a person because of Anne, raising an eyebrow from Tanya, who listened with interest. After about 90 minutes and another cup of tea, he finished sharing his story. Tanya glanced at her watch. "Oh no, I need to get back to the station to write a report for the next shift. It's one part of our job I don't do often, and honestly, I'm glad about it." Matt apologized, realizing he had taken up more time than he thought. He only knew that Tanya was a policewoman, and it felt a bit selfish to share so much of his life with her. To his surprise, Tanya handed him a card with her phone number on it. "Find a place for dinner at 7:30 tonight, and message me with a pickup time based on being in the town center. Once you do, I'll send you my address. Also, bring some bulldog clips to keep those ears back because it'll be my turn to share my story. And don't worry, there's nothing I won't eat." She smiled, and he couldn't help but notice that she seemed lively and approachable. As she walked out of the room, Matt took a better look at her. She was about 5'6" or 7, had light brown hair tied back in a ponytail, and her outfit was professional but still feminine. Her blouse was simple yet elegant, making her look very put together. Her features reminded him a bit of Emma Watson from the Harry Potter movies. The day had turned out to be quite strange, and he felt like he was experiencing something special and unexpected. He picked up his helmet and headed home, thinking about the family from the morning. Meeting Tanya had made the day feel lighter. He was looking forward to the evening. Once home, Matt told his grandmother about the accident. She had heard it on the radio and asked if he was okay. He shared the rest of his day and how he had opened up to Tanya. His grandmother was surprised. He had never talked to anyone, including her, about his life in such detail. Maybe this woman was special, she hoped. Matt made a reservation at a little Italian place in Winton, a part of Bournemouth that felt like its own small town, though many university students lived there. Since it was a weekday, the restaurant should be quiet. He texted Tanya, who asked about the dress code. He replied that casual would be fine. She sent back a smiley emoji and said she would meet him outside. Matt arrived at some modern apartments in the center of Bournemouth around 7:15. Soon, she came out and got into his car. She wore a perfume that smelled nice, like burnt wood mixed with lavender. Matt turned to her and said, "I should have asked earlier, but you're not married or with anyone else, right?" She looked surprised and a bit annoyed. Did he really need to ask that? After a moment, she answered directly, "No, I'm single. Why do you ask? Are you going to propose?" Matt's face turned red from her response. "Oh no, I didn't mean that. I just thought—" She interrupted. "Okay, I see what you mean. Maybe you should make a list of questions for future dates." Matt was really surprised. "Is this a date? I thought we were just having dinner because I talked too much earlier." Tanya put a finger to her lips as if thinking. Let me think. How about this? Let's eat, and by the end of the night, we'll see if this counts as a date." Matt started the car and pulled away, thinking this was certainly a day of two halves. They parked across the street from the restaurant, and Matt quickly got out to open the door for her. He caught a whiff of her perfume as he offered his hand to help her out of the low car. As she stepped out, he noticed her tan legs under a stylish skirt. Once again, Tanya caught him off guard. Once out of the car, she walked toward the restaurant and said, "Do you like the view?" "Wow, was it that noticeable?" he replied, his face turning red. "Uh-huh. You still haven't answered, did you like the view?" They crossed the road, both avoiding eye contact. "Sorry about that. You look amazing, and I got so caught up in my thoughts that I didn't realize how—" He paused, realizing he was in trouble. "Go on, Matt. You didn't realize how what?" Though he couldn't see her face, her playful tone hinted at a smile. Knowing he was in a tight spot, Matt decided to be honest. "I didn't know how incredibly attractive you are." She didn't respond until they reached the restaurant. With a calm expression, she leaned in, gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, and whispered, "I've moved things along. This is now officially a date." Matt was surprised and held the door for her as they entered, being led to a cozy table for two. Yes, this was clearly a romantic date. After ordering drinks and some wine, they picked up where they left off at the hospital. Tanya shared her life story. While their experiences were different, there were some similarities that made them feel connected. Tanya was 24, a year older than Matt. She had a tough start, born to a young mother who struggled with addiction. Because of this, Tanya was placed in care right away. She later tried to find her mother but learned that she had passed away from an overdose when Tanya was 20. She couldn't find any other family, as her birth certificate simply said, "Father unknown." Growing up in the system, Tanya moved through various care homes and lived with different foster families. Finally, she found a couple who truly tried to care for her like their own daughter, but she never fully bonded with them. They wanted a typical daughter, but Tanya didn't fit that mold. At 18, she went to university where she studied professional policing for 3 years and graduated with honors. This helped her join Dorset's Special Investigation Unit based in Bournemouth. With no family and friends mostly from work, she had a few casual relationships but wasn't seeking anything serious. Before they knew it, the restaurant owner came over, cleared his throat, and informed them that it was closing time. To Matt and Tanya, it felt like it was still early, but they realized it was already 11:30. After joking about who should pay, they split the bill, and Matt drove her back to her apartment. On the way back, Matt thought about what to say when they stopped, but Tanya spoke first. "Not bad for a first date. I really enjoyed it," she said. She leaned in and gently turned his face toward hers, giving him a light kiss. "I've never invited anyone up to my apartment on a first date, but this feels right. Would you like a coffee before you go home?" Matt nodded eagerly. As they entered the lift to go up to the 8th floor, they hugged and shared another kiss. It wasn't a wild kiss, but it was warm and sweet. They were still kissing when the doors opened on the 4th floor and a couple got in. As they exited the lift, Matt heard the man say to his partner, "Looks like someone is having a good night," which made them both smile as they walked into Tanya's apartment. Once inside, Matt noticed the well-kept space decorated with awards and certificates framed on the wall. Tanya clearly took pride in her achievements. They moved to the kitchen while she prepared 2 coffees. Matt complimented her on the apartment, realizing it gave him a chance to appreciate her from where he stood. He thought Tanya had a charming appeal that would easily impress his friends without making anyone feel uncomfortable. He noticed her fitted skirt and shirt, which suited her perfectly. She had a natural beauty that shone through with just the right touch of makeup. Matt was caught off guard when she handed him his cup of coffee. She smiled and said, "Let's get comfortable on the sofa." Once they settled down, Tanya quickly used her phone to play some music through the Bluetooth speakers. Soft tunes filled the background as she placed the coffee cups on the small table and moved closer to Matt, leaning in to start kissing again, resting her arm over his shoulder. Matt gently touched her other arm, running his fingers from her elbow to her shoulder and back again. They continued to enjoy this moment while the coffee cooled beside them. After a few minutes, they slowly pulled away to take a sip of their coffee. Matt noticed a thoughtful look on her face, as if she was processing something. Sensing what it might be, he decided to speak first. He didn't want to spoil the nice time they had today. After finishing his coffee, he set the cup back on the table. "Thanks for the coffee. It's getting late, and I have an early start tomorrow, so I should head home now. Tanya, today has been quite a ride for me. I feel like you showed up at just the right moment, almost as if fate brought you to that hospital today for my sake. Tonight has been, I'm trying to find the right words." Tanya jumped in before he could finish. "Magical, but not in a cheesy way," she laughed. "You don't have to go. I don't know why, but I feel really comfortable with you. You opened up to me earlier today, and that's something many couples don't do, even after years together. We've shared so much in less than 8 hours. If you want to stay, I wouldn't mind. I've never had a first date like this here, but you're special." Matt stood up, leaned down, and gave her a gentle kiss. "I'll go home. But I really like you, Tanya. I mean really like you. Part of me wants to stay, but I think it's best to wait and not rush things. That is, If you want to see me again? Wrapping her arms around his neck, she kissed him again, and it was different from before, more intense. She tried to pull him closer, but Matt placed his hands on her waist to lift her slightly. They resumed the kiss for a little while until Matt pulled back. I might need to call a friend. If we keep this up, we'll start a fire in here. They both laughed softly as she let go of him, and he eased his hold. Last chance, if you want to stay, just say it, he said. But before she could respond, Matt kissed her again. Would you like to see me again? She smiled and nodded. I'm free this Saturday. Should we plan another date? She nodded again. Great. This time you choose the place? Same time? Once more she nodded, her eyes never leaving his. They walked to the door and Matt opened it. He turned to give her a goodbye kiss. As he leaned in, she whispered in his ear, Very last chance, Matt. You can stay if you want, it's no problem. Matt kissed her softly and stepped back, saying as he headed to the lift, I'll see you Saturday. He pressed the lift button and turned to look at her while he waited. Tanya stood in the doorway, her posture inviting. Matt leaned against the lift wall as it descended, fighting the urge to rush in and take her hand. He liked her a lot and wanted to be sure this was real. Matt woke up to the sound of an alarm. He had fallen asleep surprisingly fast. In the shower, he thought about the day before and how good he felt after meeting Tanya, especially after a tough morning. He rode his R1 motorcycle to work and met with the station commander. Surprised by Matt's cheerful attitude, the commander said, It's nice to see you happy. I was worried yesterday was too much for you. Are you all right? Matt explained what happened while leaving out the details of the hospital visit. I don't really know why, but being with her made everything feel lighter. I left here feeling awful, but if Tanya hadn't been there, things could have gone differently. Yesterday felt like defeating a long hidden struggle. I'm not saying I won't be affected again, but I feel ready to handle it better. That's good to hear, Matt. Honestly, I was considering getting you some support, but I trust your feelings. Just let me know if things change. With that, the commander stood and gave Matt a reassuring pat on the back before he headed off to join his colleagues for breakfast. While Matt ate, he received a message from Tanya. Are you regretting last night? He quickly replied, No way. It was the best evening I've had in a long time. He noticed Tanya was typing a response, and soon his phone pinged again. I regret what happened last night. Matt felt a tightness in his chest, but before he could think too much about it, another message followed. I regret not convincing you to stay. He let out a breath and smiled. He typed back quickly. I wanted to, but I wanted to be respectful. It was a crazy day, and I wouldn't want you to wake up thinking about what just happened with someone you met that day. I really enjoyed being with you and can't wait for Saturday night. Have you decided where to take me yet? Maybe McDonald's or the burger van by the beach? Matt laughed. It was nice to see the fun and light-hearted banter already starting between them. Okay, I'll make sure my tux is all ready, he replied, sending the message. She quickly typed back, I'm now expecting a tux-wearing Matt to show up for me, wearing nice cologne and looking sharp. Oops, texting out loud. A call for help interrupted their playful messages, but it left Matt feeling good inside. Over the next couple of days, they continued messaging with a clear spark between them. By the end of the week, their conversations started to reveal their growing interest in each other. Saturday evening came, and Matt looked at himself in the mirror, smiling to himself. He felt good and thought he looked nice in his tuxedo. This should be fun, he thought. When he arrived at Tanya's building, he sent her a message. She replied, asking him to park the car and come up because she wasn't quite ready. He parked and walked to her apartment, finding the door slightly open. He knocked, but there was no answer. Peeking inside, he called out, Tanya? I'm in the living room, come in, she replied. As he entered, his jaw dropped at the sight in front of him. Tanya stood there in high heels and a stunning, fitted black dress. Her hair was styled elegantly, with strands framing her face. She had on more makeup than during their last meeting, which highlighted her beautiful eyes and accentuated her smile. Matt felt speechless, almost as if he were frozen in place, taken aback by her beauty. When Tanya noticed he was quiet, she put her hands on her hips and tilted her head, looking amused. I'm so sorry, he finally said. When we went out the other night, I thought you looked amazing, but this, you look incredible. I could stare at you all night. That sounds a bit cheesy, but thanks, she giggled as she walked closer to him. She stopped just in front of him and playfully touched his arm before turning her attention to the kitchen. She leaned in close and whispered, "You look pretty sharp yourself," giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. The familiar scent from their last meeting surrounded him, and he felt a flutter of excitement inside. "Though you might be a bit overdressed for McDonald's, don't you think?" she teased, glancing back as she headed toward the kitchen. At that moment, a delicious aroma filled the air, drawing Matt in with anticipation. He followed her into the kitchen where a table was set for two, filled with different pots and dishes. "Okay, I thought we were going out," he asked, looking confused. "Oh, we are going out after dinner. I'm a bit of a penny pincher, so I decided to cook. Do you like Greek food?" "I can't say I've had much Greek food other than eating gyros when I was in Corfu on a trip with friends." "That's not real Greek food. That's like the Greek version of fast food." "Looks like I'm in for a nice surprise then. Is there anything I can help with? It looks busy here." "Yes, please. There's some wine in the fridge. Look for the bottle with Top Blue on the label and pour us a couple of glasses. Then you can sit down. I'm almost ready with the first course." Once the food was served and the wine poured, they clinked their glasses together as Tanya made a toast. To a memorable night. "Yes, if the last 10 minutes are anything to go by, it certainly will be," Matt replied. "This smells wonderful. Are all these cheeses?" "Yep, 3 kinds of baked cheese, feta, graviera, and halloumi served with garlic, tomatoes, olive oil, and warm pita bread." Matt took a bite of cheese. "Wow, Tanya, this is incredible. The flavor's unbelievable." They continued with the next course of lamb cleftico, and Matt kept praising the food. They talked about the ingredients, flavors, and cooking methods, mixing in conversations about their work and life. As they finished the main course, Matt poured the last of the wine. "This wine is great too, Tanya. Should I grab another bottle from the fridge?" She sighed, looking disappointed. "Sorry, Matt, that's the only bottle of that wine. Don't worry, I'll buy some for you next week to replace it." She started laughing and reached out her arms toward him across the table. He did the same, and they held hands. "What's so funny?" he asked. "You are. That wine is from the Toplu Monastery in Crete, and it's only sold there. Unless you're planning a trip to Crete next week, you won't be replacing it." "Wow, if that was your only bottle, you should have saved it for something special." "Yeah, you're right. I should have saved it for a special occasion. It's been sitting there for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to open it." "But you told me to op." He paused as he realized Tanya thought this meal was special enough to open the wine. He let out a breath, feeling touched. "You're right. This really does feel like a special moment," Matt said. Tanya smiled and blushed at his compliment. "How did you learn to cook so well? You could open your own restaurant." "I took a special trip 3 years ago. When you're single, it's tough to go places where everyone treats you like you're alone. I found a trip where I stayed with a Greek family in Crete and learned to cook real Greek food. They took me to the Toplu Monastery, which was the calmest place I've ever been, although the winery was a bit modern for the setting. I brought back 3 bottles of wine, but the first 2 disappeared quickly. I've been saving the last one, until now." The soft music played in the background, and they exchanged glances filled with warmth. Tanya broke the silence. "Ready for dessert?" "Ooh, no way, I'm so full I can barely move," Matt said, resting his hands on his stomach. Tanya giggled and put a finger to her lips. "Oh no, that ruins my plan. I thought if I filled you with food, you'd stay here tonight instead of leaving like the other night. You were supposed to make it to the next room, but not further. I guess I overdid it. How about we clean up together to burn off some energy?" They worked together to load the dishwasher and wash some pots and pans, leaving the kitchen neat. As Tanya opened another bottle of wine, Matt asked, "I thought you said we were going out after dinner?" With a playful tone, she replied, "Yes, I did. Silly me. Let's go. Grab your wine." Tanya pulled back the curtains and opened the doors that led to a small balcony available only to the upper floors. "See? I promised we would go out after dinner," she said, gesturing for him to step outside while giggling at her little trick. They went outside and watched the sun set, enjoying the sounds of the lively local nightlife. Tanya leaned against the railings, holding onto them with both hands. Matt came up behind her and rested his head near her shoulder, enjoying the moment. They stood together, feeling a sense of closeness and comfort as the evening unfolded. She leaned back into him, and he could feel the effect she was having on him. Her soft skin, her graceful curves, and the light scent of her perfume filled the air. Matt thought to himself how perfect she seemed in that moment. After a few moments, his hands gently moved to her waist, gliding up and down her body. His fingers brushed just under the hem of her dress, lightly grazing her skin with each pass, before trailing back up and almost touching the bottom of her ribcage. As she quietly sighed, pressing herself back against him, Matt knew she was feeling the same connection. Are you trying to win me over?" she asked with a playful smile. Matt kissed her ear softly and whispered, "Yes, and I hope it's working." She turned to face him with a grin. "It's not working," she said, but before he could respond, she wrapped her arms around his neck and leaned in close. "It's not working because you had me the moment you picked me up for dinner the other night." They kissed deeply, their connection growing stronger with every passing moment. She lifted one leg and wrapped it around him as he held her close, feeling the warmth of their embrace. "Please, Matt," she whispered, "let's continue." With Tanya in his arms, Matt carefully carried her through the apartment until they reached the door to her bedroom. He paused for a moment, looking into her eyes. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked gently. Tanya gazed back at him, her expression soft and full of certainty. "Yes. I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied. Matt nudged the door open with his foot and entered the room. As they stood by the bed, he kissed her softly, letting his lips trail down her neck. Tanya reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt, her hands moving slowly as she found her way across the buttons. Once his shirt was off, she turned, giving him access to the zipper of her dress. She shivered slightly when he kissed her back, gently tugging the zipper down as he knelt behind her. His hands carefully guided the dress off her shoulders and down her body. They didn't speak, letting the quiet moments and the sound of her breathing fill the space. As the dress fell to the floor, Matt continued to kiss her softly along her waist, his movements slow and deliberate. Each gentle touch seemed to heighten the moment, and she sighed softly, caught in the stillness and intimacy they were sharing. The room was filled with a quiet intensity as Matt gently increased his focus. The atmosphere was warm, and a sense of connection flowed between them. He kissed softly down the center of her back, tracing a line with his lips, creating a series of gentle sensations that made Tanya sigh softly. He reached the top of her black underwear and, using his teeth playfully, tugged them downward, allowing them to slip off. As he continued downward, his hands lightly grazed her back, adding to the calm but electric energy in the air. Her breathing became heavier, and as she let herself relax, Matt supported her, his touch steady and careful. Once she steadied herself, he ran his hands along her legs, caressing her gently, moving upward. Without realizing it, Tanya had parted her legs slightly, responding to the quiet rhythm of the moment. His hands moved up her thighs, and he kissed along her back, working his way toward her neck. Standing behind her, he helped her out of her bra, letting it fall gently to the floor. He kissed her neck softly, and his hands moved around her, holding her gently. The connection between them deepened as he held her close, creating a quiet moment of shared trust. Tanya suddenly felt overwhelmed by the sensations, needing to catch her breath. "I need to lie down," she murmured, still feeling the intensity of the moment. Matt gently lifted her and placed her on the bed. He joined her, moving carefully, maintaining the warmth between them. She reached out to embrace him, but he was already moving down, focusing on her comfort, making sure each touch was thoughtful and calming. His hands lightly touched her waist as he kissed her legs, moving slowly and gently, creating a sense of peace. Every touch was soft and deliberate, allowing the moment to unfold naturally without rushing. As he continued, the calm quiet filled the space, and Tanya found herself lost in the stillness, breathing deeply and enjoying the connection between them. The gentle rhythm of the evening carried on, filled with warmth and trust as they shared in this intimate and quiet time together. Matt's movements became more deliberate, his focus entirely on her as he continued to gently trace over her with care. Tanya's body responded, tensing and relaxing with each touch. The intensity built steadily, and soon she could feel the rush of overwhelming sensation, like a wave moving through her from head to toe. It left her breathless and shaking, her mind trying to process the overwhelming emotions. "Oh my, wow, that was incredible," she managed to say between breaths, clearly trying to gather herself. "I don't even have words for it." Matt gently kissed his way back up her body, their connection deepening with each soft touch. As he hovered over her, their eyes met, and she whispered, "Don't hold back." He responded with a soft nod, and they continued together, moving in unison. Their connection grew stronger with every moment, the rhythm between them becoming steady and full of shared emotion. Tanya's hands clung to him as they both moved closer to that shared peak, the sound of their breathing and quiet murmurs filling the room. Afterward, as they both lay still, catching their breath, Matt gently kissed her again, the intensity of earlier now giving way to a calm, quiet moment. The room was filled with nothing but the sound of their slow breathing as they enjoyed the peaceful closeness. Tanya turned on her side, draping a leg over his, and softly traced her fingers along his chest. They didn't need to speak, the quietness between them said everything. They both sensed this was a turning point, a moment that felt important in ways they couldn't yet describe. But it was clear they had connected in a deeper way. Within an hour, they found themselves embracing again, this time slower and more tender. The initial passion had given way to a sense of care and understanding. They were no longer rushing, but simply enjoying the quiet connection between them, building something more meaningful. The next morning, Matt woke to find Tanya snuggled close to him, her arm and leg draped over him as they peacefully rested together. He watched her, seeing the glow that still filled the air from their earlier time together. After Anne, he never thought he could feel this way about another woman. Now, lying with Tanya, he realized they had formed a special connection in a short time. Maybe it was because of how they were brought together. Tanya stirred and opened her eyes to find Matt looking at her. Good morning. Why are you staring at me like that? You're not going to run off, are you?" She said it playfully, but Matt could sense a little worry behind her words. "No, I was just admiring how beautiful you are. Plus, you make a cute sound when you breathe while you sleep." "That's interesting. None of my other recent companions have said that." Matt's eyes widened at that. "How many have there been, or should I not ask?" She laughed and pretended to think, counting on her fingers. After a moment, she replied, "Well, I'd say 0 in the last 18 months, and no one before that stayed long enough to see me sleep." Matt thought about her answer and then asked, "Why now? Why me?" The mood shifted from light to serious. "I can't explain it fully. I've kept myself closed off for a long time, but I felt the need to open up and let you in. From the moment you showed kindness at the hospital, I wanted you in my life. Don't you see? We're similar. We both want to help others because of what we've been through. You chose to be a firefighter so you can save lives, just like yours was saved. I became a policewoman to help put away those who hurt others, so maybe someone else like my mom can find a better path." A tear fell as she spoke, and Matt reached out to hold her close. After a few moments, she smiled and playfully tapped his arm as she got up from the bed. "Come on, it's a nice day. Let's go for a walk and grab some breakfast." "Don't forget, I'm only in my tuxedo," she laughed. "Even better. It'll be clear you're out for a shameful walk after spending the night." They showered, dressed, and left the apartment, strolling down to one of the local eateries. Tanya laughed throughout their meal as a group of girls celebrating together nudged each other and whispered, clearly making jokes at Matt's expense. In the end, one of the girls walked over to Matt and Tanya's table and spoke to Tanya, almost ignoring Matt. "We were wondering if you're done with him. The bride mentioned she wants to celebrate, and he's got approval from all of us." They glanced at their group, who all waved playfully. Matt's face turned bright red. Tanya spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Sorry, ladies, I found him at the beach yesterday, and I'm definitely not letting him go." The group let out a light "aw," and Tanya leaned in to kiss him softly to make her point clear. They spent the rest of the day strolling along the busy beachfront. It was as if they were in a bubble, not noticing anyone around them, but very aware of each other. They enjoyed a nice dinner before heading back to her apartment in the late afternoon, where they shared a close moment together for a couple of hours before Matt headed home. He felt happy about his life. Over the coming months, Matt and Tanya's relationship grew stronger. Like DNA, they were different individuals, but connected by their love. They fit into each other's social circles well. Matt's grandmother grew fond of Tanya and treated her like family. During a visit while Matt was working, she talked openly with Tanya. "I love my grandson. He means the world to me. We raised him as our own. I know you came from different paths, but you belong together. I can see the love in your eyes for him, but I also see your passion for your work. As you both grow older, you might need to make choices sometimes. Those choices are hard to change later. Just be clear with him about what sacrifices you're both willing to make if you want to stay together in the long run now. How about some tea?" She went to the kitchen, leaving Tanya to think about what she said. When Georgina returned, Tanya asked, "Did you ever make a sacrifice for your relationship?" Georgina took Tanya's hand in hers and smiled. "Yes, I met my husband when I was younger than you. It began as a long-distance relationship. We met at a holiday camp, and I lived in Oxford, where I worked at a law firm. They saw promise in me and offered to train me to become a lawyer, though having a father who was already a partner helped. They both smiled and chuckled. My husband was a mechanic, and my parents saw him as just that, someone they didn't want for me. But I saw a man who truly loved me. When I looked into his eyes, they shone with a warmth and passion meant just for me. I knew he was the man I wanted to share my life with. So I made a big choice. I gave up my family and my dream of becoming a lawyer to be with a mechanic by the coast. My family turned their backs on me, and my hopes for a legal career faded away." Tanya was surprised by this. "Did your husband not want to move and make changes for you? It sounds like you had a lot more to lose than him." "Of course he tried. He was offered a job here, but my parents refused to accept him. They made it clear he would not be welcomed if he came. He even told me it was over. But I could see in his eyes that he loved me enough to let me go rather than hurt me. With tears in his eyes, he rode his bike home thinking he might never see me again." Both women had tears in their eyes. Tanya was curious. It seemed like the story wasn't finished. "What happened next?" Georgina smiled before continuing. "I spent the rest of the day crying. I stayed in my room feeling lost and heartbroken. I couldn't sleep that night, but I knew what I had to do. At 9 in the morning, I quietly left my home with 2 suitcases. I took a bus to the train station, and several hours later I knocked on his parents' door. His mother opened it, and when she saw me, I started to cry. She embraced me and invited me inside. I told her everything that had happened. She asked for my home phone number and called my parents to let them know I was okay and would talk to them soon. His mother let me stay, but you have to remember, this was a long time ago. My husband gave up his room for me, and he ended up sleeping on the couch. She smiled and said, "Well, he didn't always sleep on the couch." Both women laughed, and Georgina continued. "We found a small apartment and planned our wedding. My family stayed away, but some relatives came to the wedding under the condition that it wouldn't reach my parents. Within a year, I was expecting a baby, but due to complications, I couldn't have more children. Yet my husband's love for me and our son never changed. Eventually, my parents learned they were grandparents. They came around, accepted our relationship, and apologized. They could see how much my little family meant to me and realized I was happy with the choices I had made. They also understood that giving up their love for their daughter would cost them dearly because they would miss out on their grandson. They leaned back and started sipping their tea. Tanya thought about their talk and then asked a question. "Looking back on your life, if you could do things differently, would you?" Georgina replied softly. "The only thing I would change is to have stopped them from driving away to the airport. Unfortunately, that was just how things turned out. Tanya, if you ever face a similar choice, remember to listen to both your mind and your heart." With that, they quickly shifted the topic to the usual unpredictable English weather. Christmas came and went, and Matt found himself at Tanya's apartment more than his own. Tanya's experience in love had been limited until she met Matt, but it had quickly become more exciting. Matt used everything he learned from his past relationships to make sure they were partners in every way. Together, they explored new things, including some playful activities that were new for both of them. During dinner on New Year's Day, they talked about their future. Matt enjoyed being a fireman and was happy to see where his job would lead him, but he wasn't eager to rush things. Tanya had different goals. She worked in a special police division that often collaborated with national and international crime agencies. She aimed to become one of the best in her field. During their casual dinner conversation, Matt asked a question that Tanya had been hoping for, and she was ready with her answer. "Do you want kids?" he asked. "I want to be the best at what I do. It might take about 5 years of hard work and then I can relax," she replied. Tanya had given Matt the nickname Catch after they had their first day out together, and she still used it. "When you say relax, what do you mean?" Matt asked sincerely. "Then I want us to have a family together," she said, looking for his reaction. "But what if 5 years isn't enough? What if it takes longer than 10 or 15 years? Tanya noticed he sounded a bit worried. "I believe in myself. I hope you do too. I promise that if I can't make my dream happen before it's too late, I will follow the dream we are talking about now." Talking with Georgina had made her think about their future. She knew they needed to set some important goals in their relationship to make it work. "Matt, if I had to move to another part of the country for this, would you come with me?" He stood up, walked to her, and gave her a kiss. "I would follow you anywhere to help you reach your goals, but we can't wait too long to make our plans." Everything was out in the open now. Tanya felt good about where they were headed. Matt was happy too, but a little worry crept into his mind about Tanya's career. He let it go for today. After all, they weren't even talking about marriage. On February 29th, Tanya texted Matt while he was at work. "I'm taking you out to dinner tonight at 8 p.m., our place. Dress nicely, but no tuxedo." He knew that our place meant the Italian restaurant where they had their first meal together. It was their special spot for any celebration, no matter how small. Matt went home to change, but found no sign of Tanya at the apartment. She didn't arrive before he left for the restaurant either. When he got there, he spotted Tanya looking beautiful. He realized she must have spent a lot of time getting ready with a new hairstyle, fresh makeup, and a lovely dress he had never seen before that shimmered in the light. Many people in the restaurant were admiring her too. "Wow, Tanya, you look fantastic. Am I missing a special occasion?" "Nope, you can relax. You haven't missed anything, well, not directly," she said with a playful smile, noticing he didn't understand the importance of the day. "What is it then? Please don't tell me you got a promotion?" "Not exactly, but it could happen. Let's eat, and I'll tell you all about it after dinner." They enjoyed their meal, but Tanya wouldn't reveal what she had to say. Matt could see something on her face, but he wasn't sure if it was excitement or nerves or maybe both. After finishing the main course, she excused herself to the restroom. When she came back, she stood beside Matt and then knelt down next to him. In her hand, she held a small, square box. She opened it and took out what looked like a silver ring, but it was actually 2 rings that were joined to seem like one. "Will you marry me?" Tanya asked, smiling. Matt jumped from his chair and swept Tanya off her feet. She wrapped her legs around him as he kissed her and said, "Yes, I will." The restaurant filled with cheers and applause as she slipped one ring onto Matt's finger. He then put the other ring on Tanya's finger. "Oh, wow, today is February 29th, leap year. It's the day when a woman can propose to a man." Matt realized why Tanya thought it was special. 6 weeks later, they were married in a simple ceremony at the local registry office. It was small because neither of them had a big family, so their friends and colleagues filled the room. Tanya was given away by her boss, Graham, who had been like a father figure to her. Their wedding rings were gold versions of their engagement rings, and they matched perfectly. They flew off for their honeymoon in Crete. They visited a family where Tanya had stayed to learn to cook, and instead of staying at a hotel, they were invited to stay with them for 2 days. A big meal was prepared for over 30 guests. Towards the end of the celebration, Athena, the woman who had welcomed Tanya, pulled her aside. "When you were here before, you seemed sad, and it looked like you needed something more in life. Whatever happens, never let this man go. Be sure to make him happy, and you will find happiness too." They hugged before returning to the party. After saying their goodbyes, they promised to visit again before flying home. On their way to the next spot, they visited the Toplu Monastery. Even though Matt wasn't religious, he could see why Tanya was drawn to the peacefulness and dedication of the monks there. They participated in a wine tasting and needed to decide how many bottles to buy. "Okay, Tanya, which ones and how many should we get?" Matt asked. knowing that wine was more her area of expertise. After a moment of thought, Tanya replied, "Let's take 9 mixed bottles." 9? That seems like an unusual number, Matt said, curious. Tanya reached for his hand and explained, "Let's say 1 for each anniversary, which takes us to 5, and then 4 more for when we have a child." She smiled warmly, looking into his eyes. "I've been thinking about our future. In 5 years, I want to reach my personal goals, and then our goals will change together, no matter how far I get on my own." Matt felt a sense of relief. He understood that Tanya was committing to their future together. Since their discussion on New Year's Day, he worried a bit about what would happen if she didn't achieve her work goals as planned. Would this delay their dreams of starting a family with Matt? What if her job rewards never came? He leaned over and kissed her. They didn't need to talk. They both understood that the concern they had seemed less important now. Their moment was interrupted by a small cough from the monk who had hosted the wine tasting. "Oops, sorry," Tanya giggled. She picked out 9 bottles they wanted, and they thanked the monk for his hospitality before heading off to continue their journey. They traveled to the southeast side of the island to a small place called Kato Zakros, which sat at the end of a road that twisted through the hills, offering breathtaking views as they descended. The town was small, with just a few family-run restaurants and some rooms or apartments to rent. At the far end, they found 4 cozy apartments above a beachside restaurant, accessible by a short path. Their room was small but nicely furnished, and best of all, it had a balcony overlooking the bay, while also offering a view of the Gorge of the Dead behind the village. They enjoyed a romantic meal on the beach, sharing a bottle of wine. Since it was early in the season, there were very few visitors, making it feel like they had the place to themselves. After dinner, they strolled along the shoreline, stopping to kiss in the peaceful surroundings far from home. With little light pollution, they were surrounded by stars, with only the soft sound of waves and the chirping of cicadas in the sparse vegetation. They reached a small outcrop that offered some privacy from the nearby restaurants. Tanya wrapped her arms around Matt's neck and pulled him in for a kiss. "Let's enjoy this moment together, right here." With that, they settled down on the beach, sharing gentle kisses. The night sky looked down on them, and Tanya promised herself to always be there for Matt. They continued to kiss with deep affection, feeling a strong connection as they shared their love under the stars. Afterwards, they lay close together on the beach, looking up at the stars. "You'll always be mine, and I'll always be yours," said Tan, as she snuggled into him, feeling happy about life and where it was headed. They were both committed to each other, and they could see a clear future together. There will always be challenges in a relationship, thought Tanya, but they would face them together. In a few years, that challenge would arrive. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.